A 6-year-old boy tore a starship apart with the Force, and didn't remember doing it. He was a clone. He was a shadow. He was supposed to obey. This is the story of Starkiller, the apprentice who shouldn't exist. And it begins in the dark, cold laboratories of Kamino. Camino was a world built by storms. The sky never stopped howling. The rain never stopped falling. And in a sealed facility far from the public eye, Darth Vader ordered something that had never been attempted before. The recreation of a Force-sensitive being, born not of nature, but of design. Not just any being, but Galen Marek, his secret apprentice, his greatest failure, his weapon that had learned to care. Galen had died, not once but twice. The first time, by Vader's own hand. The second time, by choosing the rebellion over his master. And yet, Vader could not let go. He did not mourn the boy. He did not honor him. He simply rebuilt him. Cell samples recovered from Galen's remains were handed over to the Kaminoans, but even they hesitated. Cloning Force-sensitive beings was a myth, a risk, a biological impossibility. The Force resisted replication. It created imbalance, madness. But Vader demanded results, not warnings. And so they obeyed. In a lower chamber, hidden from the Empire's upper ranks, dozens of tanks were filled with embryonic copies. Failed clones dissolved into nutrient fluid within days. Others survived for weeks before their nervous systems collapsed. They were not him. Vader watched every stage. He walked among the glass tanks in silence. He said nothing, but in his silence there was judgment. Then one day, one of them lived, longer than the others, stronger, more stable. His heartbeat was erratic but functional. His cells regenerated faster than expected. Neural links formed like wildfire across his brain. His DNA, for reasons still unknown, resisted the decay that had destroyed the others. The Kaminoans labeled him Subject 1138. Vader did not use that name. He called him Starkiller, not out of affection, but as a reminder. The name meant destruction, obedience, a tool without hesitation, a child raised in darkness and trained to strike without thought. But this version had never been trained. Not yet. He lay dormant in the tank for weeks, floating, motionless, eyes closed, until one day they opened, and he screamed, not from pain, but from memory. Because the moment his eyes adjusted to the cloudy light above, visions hit him, searing images that made no sense but felt real. A red lightsaber crackling in his hand. A man in black armor calling him apprentice. A pilot. A woman. Blonde hair. Soft eyes. And then fire. A death that felt like his own, but wasn't. The Kaminoan scientists scrambled to sedate him. Electrodes pierced his skin. Restraints engaged automatically. But the clone was already different. Already powerful. He snapped the restraints. The tank shattered. And for the first time, a clone of Galen Marek stood on shaking legs, naked, shivering, bleeding from his nostrils. Alone. Vader entered the room, slowly. He did not react to the mess. He did not speak. He simply stepped forward and looked into the eyes of the creature he had built from guilt. They were the same eyes, but what lived behind them was not yet clear. He would not speak to the clone, not until it earned the right to exist. And so the training began, not with discipline, not with loyalty, but with confusion, with trauma, with forced silence. The clone didn't know his name. He didn't know his past. But in his mind, someone else did. And that was the problem. The clone learned pain before he learned language. Camino's lights never dimmed, and the sound of rain never softened. In that endless noise, Starkiller was restrained again and again, not with chains, but with procedures. Needles entered his spine. Machines pressed against his skull. The Kaminoan spoke calmly, as if he were equipment, as if the screaming meant nothing. They were not trying to teach him who he was. They were trying to see what he remembered. Every cycle began the same way. The lights would brighten. His eyes would open. And before a single question could be asked, the memories would return. A forest burning under a red sky. A Jedi Master falling to his knees. A voice in armor saying, "You are nothing without me." Starkiller did not understand these images, but his body reacted as if it did. His heart raced, his muscles tightened. His hands curled, reaching for a weapon that was not there. Sometimes he cried. Sometimes he lashed out. Once, without warning, the room folded inward. Instruments ripped from the walls. A durasteel table bent like soft metal. 3 scientists were thrown across the chamber and did not get back up. The clone stared at his hands afterward, shaking. He did not remember choosing to do it. Darth Vader observed from behind the glass. He said nothing. He never interrupted. He let the Kaminoans continue, even when they begged him to terminate the subject. Even when they warned him that the clone's mind was fragmenting under the weight of inherited memory. Vader did not care about the mind. He cared about control. So he ordered the memories intensified. They fed Starkiller fragments of Galen Marek's past through forced neural imprinting, combat drills, pain responses, fear triggers. They believed repetition would overwrite confusion. Instead, it broke him further. Because the memories were not passive, they argued with each other. One moment, Starkiller felt loyalty to the armored figure. The next, hatred. Love followed by betrayal. Trust followed by loss. And always the woman returned. Juno Eclipse. He did not know her name, but he knew her face. Knew the way her voice softened when she said his. Knew the warmth of her hand through a glove. When he tried to speak of her, the scientist sedated him. When he screamed her name in his sleep, Vader listened. The clone began to ask questions. Who am I? Why do I hurt? Why do I remember dying? No one answered. They taught him to stand, to walk, to fight. They put a lightsaber in his hand before he understood what one was. The moment his fingers closed around the hilt, the memories surged stronger than ever. His stance corrected itself. His grip tightened. His body moved with practiced precision. The Kaminoans stared in silence. This was not learning. This was recall. Vader finally stepped into the chamber. The clone fell to his knees without being told, not from obedience but from pressure. The dark presence crushed his thoughts, silenced the memories, forced stillness into his shaking body. "You are alive because I allow it," Vader said. Starkiller looked up. Tears ran down his face. He did not know why. "What am I?" he asked. Vader waited. Then he answered, slowly. "You are what remains." The clone did not understand the words, but he felt their weight settle inside him. And somewhere deep in his mind, Galen Marek remembered kneeling in the same way, remembered asking the same question. And remembering began to hurt more than forgetting. They trained him like a weapon, but he bled like a man. Every session on Camino was designed to strip him down, break his mind, build his body. Starkiller was not taught control. He was conditioned to react. His limbs remembered forms he could not name. His instincts were faster than explanation. Lightsaber techniques from Galen Marek's stolen memories pulsed through his muscles like echoes from a life he had never lived. But something was wrong. He hesitated. Not in combat, never in combat. Against droids, his precision was violent and beautiful. But in silence, when the drills were over and the room was still, the hesitation crept in like a sickness. He would glance at the Kaminoans, searching their faces for something. Recognition, approval, meaning. He didn't find it. Because to them, he was a template. And he was failing. His reactions were too emotional, his power too unstable. When the other clones had spiraled into madness, they had been disposed of without ceremony. But Starkiller lingered not out of success, but out of potential, a word that meant little to him, but everything to Vader. One day, without warning, the tests changed. The droids were faster, the shocks harsher, the environment unpredictable. A chamber filled with fire, another with darkness so deep it swallowed sound. Starkiller passed them all, but the cost was growing. He began to hear voices, not just Marek's memories anymore. Other voices, too many. They whispered things he didn't understand. You are nothing. You let her die. He'll kill you again. They came in his sleep. They came in combat. Once, they made him drop his blade during a duel. A moment of vulnerability punished immediately. The training droid shattered his rib. As he lay coughing on the floor, he looked at his own blood. Red, familiar, human. And for the first time, a thought formed clearly. I am alive. He didn't speak it aloud. He couldn't. Not under Vader's watch. But the thought stayed with him. It settled under his skin, quiet and waiting. Later that cycle, Vader summoned him to the central chamber. No tests, no scientists, just the sound of the storm pounding the walls. Starkiller entered in silence. Vader stood alone, lightsaber unlit, hands behind his back. You are flawed, Vader said, but useful. The clone remained still. You feel fear, he continued. You see ghosts. No response. You believe. They make you weak. A pause. But they are the only thing that makes you real. Starkiller looked up. For a moment, something passed between them. Not warmth, not approval, but recognition. A shared condition. Vader, too, was haunted. You will be tested, the Sith Lord said. Truly. Then he turned away. If you survive, you may ask your question again. It was not a command. It was a promise. If, naughty, 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 naughty. That night, the clone stood in front of the mirror. There were no restraints, no needles. Just his reflection, pale skin, scarred arms, dark eyes that did not know what they were looking at. He touched the glass, closed his eyes, and asked the question once more. Who am I? No one answered. But this time, no one needed to. Because in the silence, he realized the answer terrified him. Not because he didn't know, but because a part of him did. And that part, the hidden piece deep beneath the layers of training and trauma, had a name. And it wanted to be free. He no longer feared the lightning, because now it lived inside him. Every step Starkiller took became more unstable, not in his footing, but in his thoughts. The line between reflex and memory was gone. The combat drills had ended weeks ago, but the fighting hadn't. He battled images, hallucinations, whispers, and somewhere deep inside, something shifted. He stopped asking who he was. He began asking why. Why was he trained? Why was he recreated? Why couldn't they let Galen Marek die? The Kaminoans noticed the change. His vitals spiked during rest cycles. Neural patterns showed unexpected growth areas of the brain usually dormant lit up with activity. The clone had stopped resisting the memories. He was integrating them, but not like a machine taking orders, like a mind reclaiming fragments of itself. He no longer obeyed without question. He no longer paused when Vader entered the chamber. And when ordered to strike, he hesitated just long enough to be noticed. The punishments returned, not physical, psychological. Vader constructed illusion chambers, replicas of battles from Marek's life, Jedi prisoners begging for mercy, visions of Juno eclipse bleeding in his arms. Every simulation was a lie, but the pain it caused was real, and Starkiller endured them all. Not because he was strong, but because he was changing. One night, during a forced isolation phase, the clone sat beneath the emergency lights of a locked chamber. No training, no observers, no food, just time. And a single memory came to him, without force, without violence. Galen Marek, standing aboard a rebel frigate, choosing to betray Vader, choosing to sacrifice himself. The moment replayed in silence, and Starkiller smiled not with joy, but with understanding. He had been created to erase that moment, to replace a traitor with a weapon. But what if the weapon remembered why the traitor fell? With erective raise of, that's a many. The next test was different. He was placed in a chamber with a dozen live targets: smugglers, mercenaries, prisoners. They were armed. They were told nothing. Vader gave a single command: survive. The lights went out, and what followed was not a duel, but a storm. Starkiller moved like a phantom. His saber tore through armor and bone. Blaster bolts bent around him. One mercenary begged for mercy, and Starkiller paused. A whisper reached his ear. Mercy is weakness. But this time, he didn't listen. He deactivated his saber and turned away. The mercenary fired anyway. Starkiller caught the bolt in his palm, raw lightning bursting from his fingertips. The air screamed. The prisoner died instantly, but the clone just stood there, staring at his hand. He hadn't called the lightning. It had called him. Afterward, he sat alone in the darkness, and something broke open inside his chest. Not physically, not visibly, but emotionally. He wasn't just remembering anymore. He was feeling. He felt grief. He felt betrayal. He felt love. And none of it was his. But it could be. That night, Starkiller made a decision. Not to escape, not yet, but to pretend, to survive, to wait. Because somewhere out there, the real Juno eclipse still existed. And if he could find her, maybe he could find out if he was real. Not as a weapon, not as a clone, but as something new, something Vader never planned for. Lightning surged again through his body, this time under control. He exhaled, opened his eyes, and, for the first time, he didn't feel like a copy. He felt like a beginning. He dreams every night, but they aren't his dreams. He sees temples, stone halls lined with broken statues. He feels the hum of lightsabers against his skin. He hears voices, some calm, some cruel, some screaming. Every time his eyes close, the galaxy shifts. People he doesn't know weep for him. Others beg him to stop. Some call him friend. Others call him murderer. None of them know his name, because he doesn't either. The clone sleeps in a repurposed cell deep beneath the Kaminoan research sector. They call it a rest chamber, but it's a prison. The walls are smooth, damp with condensation. The rain outside never stops, but inside, the silence is deeper than sound. And yet, his mind is never quiet. He wakes most nights soaked in sweat, not from fear, from confusion, from exhaustion, from trying to hold on to dreams that vanish before he can ask what they meant. Once, he spoke to a technician, one of the few who treated him with something like humanity. "I see people," he said. "I hear their voices." The man didn't respond, just wrote something down and left the room. Starkiller never saw him again. The scientists believe the dreams are side effects, neural imprints, echoes of Galen Marek's memories, bleeding through the cloning process. They call them artifacts, symptoms, contamination. But to the clone, they feel like something more. Because sometimes they show him things no one ever taught him. Like how to disarm a blaster with one hand. Like how to move through a battlefield using only sound. Like how to speak Shiri-Wook, the Wookiee language, without knowing why he knows it. These are not dreams, they're instructions. But every instruction comes wrapped in pain. He remembers being thrown through glass by a Jedi. He remembers lightning running up his arm. He remembers dying in the arms of a woman with tears in her eyes. And always, he wakes up too soon. One night, something new happens. The chamber lights flicker, not from failure, from interference. A surge in the force, invisible but sharp. The air turns heavy, the kind of heaviness that only comes before a storm. And he feels watched, not by cameras, by something inside the room, a presence. Familiar, cold, heavy. He rises from the bed slowly, walks to the mirror. At first, it's just his reflection. Then the image changes. Not his face anymore. Galen Marek's. Eyes softer, wounded, determined. It doesn't speak, it just stares. Then, the face shifts again, burned, broken, scarred from battle. Then again, older, weary, but calm. Each time, a different version, a different life. The clone grips the edge of the sink. He wants to scream. He wants to break the mirror. He wants to make it stop. But instead, he breathes. Because he knows now. These aren't visions. They're fragments. Pieces of a man who died, pieces Vader tried to erase. But some echoes never leave. The clone looks into his own eyes again. He sees all of them, and none of them. And for the first time, he wonders if maybe he was never meant to sleep peacefully at all. She appears in every memory that hurts the most. Always near the end. Always just before the fall. Blonde hair caught in wind. A uniform. A ship's bridge. Eyes that look at him like he's more than just a weapon. He doesn't know her name, but his hands remember holding hers. And that is worse than forgetting. With ease free too. With ease free too. With ease free too. The dreams are changing. They used to come in flashes, unconnected, like broken signals from a forgotten life. Now they arrive like stories. Slow, heavy. Always circling back to her. In one memory, she's shouting his name across a collapsing hangar. In another, she's cradling him as the light fades from his eyes. In the worst of them, she walks away and never turns back. He wakes from that one, gasping, reaching, and finds nothing. Just Camino, just rain, just silence. The scientists have taken notice. They increase the sedation, change the neural maps, try to redirect the memories toward more useful pathways. But the woman always returns. Because she's not just a memory, she's a feeling. When he thinks of her, the rage stops, the pain slows, the voice is quiet. She brings him something the others never do. Stillness. He asks Vader about her once. Not directly. He knows better. But during a training session, between strikes, he dares to speak. There was a woman. Vader doesn't stop moving. The lightsaber slams into Starkiller's shoulder. Sparks, burnt cloth. A cry held behind gritted teeth. Forget her, Vader says. But the clone can't. Because forgetting her would mean forgetting the only part of himself that feels real. With he's free too. With he's free too. With he's free too. Later, during recovery, he returns to the mirror. Same face, same scars, same questions. But this time, he speaks aloud. She knew me. Not just the man he might have been. Not just the weapon he was made to be. Me. And in that moment, he makes a choice. He will not say her name. Not yet. He will not ask for her from his captors. But he will not let go of her face, her presence, the part of him that reaches for her in every dream. She is the thread, and if he follows it, he might find himself on the other side. With ease free too. With ease free too. With ease free too. The next test is different. A combat scenario. Dozens of opponents. Simulated pain at maximum levels. But something's changed. He fights like before, fast, brutal, efficient. But there's restraint. He doesn't kill when he doesn't have to. He doesn't listen to the voice that says strike harder. Because her face is with him. And somewhere deep inside, he wants to be someone she wouldn't run from. He leaves the chamber bruised, but calm. The Kaminoans call it a regression. Vader says nothing. But his silence lingers longer than usual. Almost like he's starting to see what's happening. Not a failure of obedience, but a spark of independence. The clone returns to his cell. He doesn't sleep. He just closes his eyes and pictures her one more time. Still unknown, still unnamed, but closer now, like she's not just in the past, like she's waiting. He can feel it now, the Force, but it doesn't feel like his. It rises through him like a memory, ancient, scarred, unfinished. Every time he reaches for it, he wonders if it's reacting to him or to the pieces of someone else inside him. During training, he uses it without thinking. The Force moves his body before he gives it permission. Lightning bursts from his fingers without command. His lightsaber flies back to his grip the moment he reaches, not because he learned it, but because someone else did. This is what terrifies him most. Not that he's powerful, but that he's not the one holding the power. A 93 was a safe, a 93, a 93, a 93. The instructors report progress. Reflexes above projected thresholds. Combat aptitude nearing Galen Marek's peak. Cognitive integration improving. But buried in the notes are warning signs. Emotional drift. Unprovoked resistance. Deviations from assigned behavior loops. The clone doesn't see the reports, but he feels the pressure in every new session. Vader watches more closely now. He's silent, but the silence is different. Less observation, more judgment. The clone notices it, and something inside hardens. Because he doesn't want to be judged. He wants to be understood. A 93 was a seer's see. A 93, a 93, a 93, a 93, a 93, a 93, a 93. One morning, in a test chamber flooded with mist, Starkiller closes his eyes. He's told to disarm a squad of droids, high-speed targets, non-lethal scenario. But when the first bolt fires, He doesn't move. The Force responds anyway. The droids collapse before they reach him, crushed by a wave he didn't consciously create. Not defense, not aggression. Instinct. He drops to one knee afterward, gasping. And in his mind, he sees Marek again. Not dying, not fighting, but kneeling, just like this, before Vader. Hands empty, head bowed, afraid, but also free. That moment lingers longer than the rest, because it doesn't feel like a memory. It feels like a warning. A 93 was a seer's high twos, a 93 and 26. Later that day, during debrief, he speaks, not to the Kaminoans, not to the technicians, to himself. I am not him, he whispers, but he is part of me. No one responds, but he knows the walls are listening. He knows Vader is listening, and he says it again louder. I am not him, because it matters. Because if he doesn't say it, he'll vanish under the weight of someone else's life. He'll become Galen Marek's shadow, a memory pretending to be a man. And that is not living. That is programming. A 93 was a seer's see. A 93, a 93, a 93. The Force doesn't choose sides. He understands that now. It doesn't reward kindness. It doesn't punish cruelty. It responds to will. And he has will. Not inherited. Not stolen. His own. That night, in isolation, he meditates without command. No tests. No sedatives. No conditioning. Just breath. Just silence. And in that silence, he finds something unexpected. Stillness. Not peace, not yet, but the first shape of identity. The Force moves through him again, slower this time. Not violent, not confused. It flows. And for the first time, it feels like it belongs to him. Not Galen. Not Vader. Him. Whoever that turns out to be. Vader does not confront him immediately. That is the cruelty. Days pass, then weeks. Training continues as if nothing has changed. But the weight in the air grows heavier with every session. The clone feels it pressing against his chest, against his thoughts, against the fragile sense of self he has only just begun to form. When Vader finally speaks, it is not in anger. It is in certainty. You are diverging, he says. The chamber is empty except for them. No observers, no scientists, just the sound of rain striking durasteel far above. Starkiller stands at attention, shoulders tense, jaw tight. Divergence is failure, Vader continues. Failure invites correction. The Force tightens around Starkiller's throat. Not enough to kill him. Just enough to remind him who controls the air in his lungs. You are not Galen Marek, Vader says. You are what remains after his weakness was burned away. The clone does not answer. He cannot. Because for the first time, the words do not settle inside him. They slide off. Vader senses it immediately. The pressure increases. Memories are forced into the clone's mind, battles, screams, pain sharpened into weapons. The death on the Death Star. The moment of sacrifice. The betrayal that made Galen Marek useless. Feel it, Vader commands. Accept it. But Starkiller feels something else. Anger. Not hatred. Defiance. The Force surges outward, uncontrolled but real. The chamber cracks, panels tear free from the walls. Vader steps back half a pace. Half a pace. It is the only warning Starkiller needs. He drops to one knee, not in submission, but in restraint. He clamps down on the power before it consumes him. His hands shake. His breath is uneven. Vader watches carefully now. This is no longer a test of obedience. It is a test of outcome. You will be sent off-world, Vader says at last. You will serve a purpose. Starkiller looks up, not with fear, with focus. Nen yourself, with the Viscos and the Prisk. Men yourself and times and the Viscos and the Mecha. Afterward, alone in his cell, the clone sits in the dark. The memories are quieter now. Not gone, but organized. They no longer crash into him without warning. They wait, like soldiers. He understands something then. Vader does not fear his power. He fears his choice, because Galen Marek chose to die for something beyond himself. And this clone might choose differently. The thought settles deep, heavy, and dangerous. Outside, Kamino's storms rage on. Inside, something has changed forever. Starkiller lies back and closes his eyes. He does not dream. He remembers, not as Galen Marek, not as Vader's weapon, but as someone standing at the edge of a path that has not yet been walked. And for the first time since his creation, the future feels uncertain. Not because it is controlled, but because it is his. The storm didn't begin in the sky. It began in him. Long before the lightning touched the towers of Camino, Starkiller knew something was coming. He felt it in the tension between his thoughts, in the flickers behind his eyes, in the slow unraveling of control that had once kept him silent. The scientists believed he was stabilizing. Vader believed he was obeying. But deep below their expectations, something had started to break. Not like glass, like a chain. He no longer wanted answers. He wanted out. In makes and mena takes, on the Sullivan the refills, in with a nake Sullivan nakes cows. They had brought him back from death. Not once, not truly, not like Galen Marek, but in their own way. In the cold, sterile way the Sith believe they can outthink destiny. They built a body, fed it memories, called it a tool. But Starkiller had stopped seeing himself as a tool. He didn't belong in the tank anymore. He belonged elsewhere, wherever that meant, wherever the storm would take him. That morning, Kamino's atmosphere shifted. Winds doubled. Lightning pierced the ocean mist. Systems began to fail, minor glitches at first. Energy flux, unstable field dampeners. The weather was not supposed to interfere with the facility. But nothing on Camino had ever been natural. The clone stood at the viewport of his assigned chamber, watching the waves smash against the outer domes. He didn't flinch when the lights flickered. He didn't turn when alarms began to echo across the structure. He had seen it all before in a dream that wasn't a dream. A hallway collapsing, a body falling, a lightsaber buried in a wall. He'd seen this moment, felt it coming, and he was ready. In questions, the resting south to my guestons. It began with a failed transport request. A technician filed an order to move Subject 1138 to another testing wing. No destination listed, no reason entered. The file corrupted itself mid-transfer. Then a second order was filed, contradicting the first. By the time the guards realized something was wrong, Starkiller was already gone. Not running, moving, quiet, intentional, like he belonged to the structure's bones. He passed cameras that blinked at the wrong moment, doors that stayed open half a second too long. It was as if the facility or the Force wanted him to leave. Vader was off-world. The Kaminoans had grown overconfident. Security had relaxed. They didn't realize they had created a variable that could think for itself. The first alert didn't come until he reached the lift system. By then, it was too late. He was inside the tower that housed the experimental hangars. And he wasn't alone. My endos. 2 stormtroopers intercepted him on level 3. They didn't recognize him at first. No uniform, no weapon drawn. Just a dark figure in a hallway full of smoke and static. Identify. The words didn't finish. The lights flickered once. The air trembled, and Starkiller's hand moved. Not to draw a saber. To push. The force erupted from his chest like a cannon blast. The troopers slammed into the walls. Their helmets cracked on impact. Their bodies didn't rise. No alarms blared. Only the sound of the rain, louder than ever. Well, Wally Sminus. He kept moving. No hesitation. No rage. Just purpose. The hangar bay was ahead. One ship remained fueled, a sleek vessel, not designed for long-range flight, but fast, small, enough to disappear. He reached the door, but it was locked. Biometric control, restricted access. He placed his hand on the panel. It rejected him. He didn't flinch. He reached out, not with fingers, with focus. The panel sparked, then melted, then opened. He stepped inside the hangar and saw freedom for the first time. It didn't feel glorious. It felt earned. The hangar wasn't silent. Nothing on Camino ever was. But this silence felt different. Not absence of sound, absence of presence. No alarms, no shouting, no footsteps. Just the wind screaming through the cracked seals, and the soft hum of a ship waiting to leave. Starkiller stepped onto the platform, every muscle alert. His mind raced, not with fear, but with memory, or something close to it. The rain hit his skin like needles, cold, fast, constant. It soaked through his clothes. But he didn't stop. His eyes scanned the chamber, searching for the path he'd seen in his dreams. This was the place. He didn't remember being here, but something inside him had. Well, wall his rinds. The first hallucination hit as he reached the loading ramp. A shadow to his left, tall, armored, breathing that echoed like thunder. He turned fast, saber in hand, breath caught in his throat. Nothing, just vapor, but he could still hear it. That sound. He moved again, this time faster. Across the platform, toward the cockpit. The second vision struck harder. Flashes, fire, a woman's voice crying out his name, not the number they'd given him, his real name. Galen. It wasn't real, but it wasn't false either. Well, Wally Ston. He stumbled, caught himself on the hull of the ship, closed his eyes. Inside, the storm roared louder, and when he opened them again, he wasn't in the hangar anymore. He was on a starship, the rogue shadow. He recognized the control panel, the curve of the chair, the flickering lights overhead, the red glow of hyperspace ahead. Juno Eclipse was in front of him. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. She turned to look at him. Her face was calm, her eyes soft. "You're not him," she said, "but I still see him." He blinked. She was gone. So was the ship. He was back on Camino, on his knees, breathing hard, rain pounding the deck. Well, wall his rinds. The ship before him was real, small, ugly, fast. He boarded without hesitation. Every surface felt foreign. but not unwelcome. He powered up the console. Systems responded. Coordinates blank, no lockout codes. Whoever had prepped the ship hadn't finished securing it. He didn't question the timing. He accepted it. The hatch sealed behind him. Engines hummed to life. The docking bay groaned. Then came the voice. Not over the comm. Inside his mind. "You can run," Vader said, "but you will never be free." He gritted his teeth. Not in anger. In resistance. "I don't need to be free," he whispered. "I just need to be gone." And with that, he lifted the ship. The platform shuddered. Torrents of wind slammed into the hull, but the vessel rose. Through the open ceiling, into the clouds, into the storm. "If you come mine, I werve. Camino vanished beneath him. The ocean, the labs, the memories, all shrinking behind as clouds turned to sky. But inside, nothing shrank. The vision stayed. The voices whispered. The pain traveled. And Starkiller realized the escape was real. But the war inside wasn't over. It had just begun. The alarms finally screamed. Red light flooded the corridors as the facility woke in panic. Blast doors slammed shut too late. Security droids poured from maintenance shafts. The Kaminoans shouted orders that overlapped and contradicted each other. Starkiller felt it all like pressure in his skull. He had been a secret for too long. Now the secret was bleeding. "If you come mine, I werve. Y1, 2. The moment his ship lifted, the facility locked down. But Camino was built to contain creatures that resisted control. Its holes were long, narrow, and filled with choke points. And Starkiller knew how to move through them. Not because he had been taught, because he remembered. He cut through the auxiliary corridor instead of the main passage. Steam filled the air, hissing from ruptured pipes. Water pooled around his boots, reflecting the emergency lights like broken glass. A squad of troopers rounded the corner ahead. They didn't hesitate. Blaster fire lit the hole. Starkiller raised his hand without thought. Bolts froze midair, humming like trapped insects. His other hand closed slowly. The bolts collapsed inward. The troopers fell with them. He stood still afterward, chest rising and falling. The force trembled around him, unstable but responsive. This wasn't training anymore. This was survival. "If you commide, to one, and Tuolazide." As he moved deeper, the visions returned. Not memories this time. Warnings. A flash of blue light ahead. A ceiling collapsing to his left. A blade igniting behind him. He obeyed them without question. Dodged before danger appeared. Struck before threats revealed themselves. The force guided him like a hand on his back, pushing him forward through smoke and chaos. Then the heat came. A fuel line ruptured in the eastern wing. Fire tore through the corridor, rolling across the ceiling like a living thing. The air burned his lungs. Metal warped and screamed. He ran through it anyway. Pain licked his skin. The smell of scorched fabric filled his nose. But he didn't stop, because somewhere beyond the fire was open space. "If you commide, to one, and Tuolazide." A blast door sealed inches from his face. He slammed into it, teeth rattling. For a moment, he considered turning back. Then he felt him. Darth Vader had returned. Not physically, but through the Force. A weight pressed down on Starkiller's mind. Heavy, familiar, furious. The corridor lights shattered. "You were never meant to choose," Vader's voice echoed inside him. Starkiller roared not in defiance, but effort. He planted his feet and pushed against the door with everything he had. The metal buckled, screamed, began to bend. The pressure intensified. "You are incomplete," Vader said. "You exist because I allow it." The door tore free from its frame. Starkiller staggered forward as debris crashed around him. "I exist," he said aloud, "because I decided to." The force surged. The flames behind him exploded outward, racing down the corridor like a wave. Droids and troopers vanished in the blast. The hall collapsed in on itself, sealing the path behind him forever. "Wills, make under one. Wills send a new Avamina." He reached the outer platform just as emergency cannons powered up. Turbolasers tracked his ship, locking on. Starkiller didn't look back. He sprinted through smoke and rain, leapt across the gap, and slammed into the cockpit seat. The hatch sealed automatically. The first shot missed. The second clipped the wing. The ship spun violently. Starkiller screamed not in fear, but focus. He grabbed the controls, poured the force into stabilizing the hull. The storm swallowed him whole. Lightning flashed past the viewport. Then space opened. Stars replaced clouds, and Camino fell away behind him. "Wills, make R8. Wills, 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 wills." As hyperspace stretched into blue, Starkiller slumped back in his seat. Burned, shaking, alive. Vader's presence faded, but the echo remained. A promise. This wasn't over, but the holes were burning, and the path back was gone. The ship drifted in hyperspace, silent and nameless. Its console blinked softly, waiting for input. Coordinates blank. Destination unknown. Starkiller sat alone in the pilot's chair, his hands still trembling from the fire, his skin raw from the heat. The smell of smoke clung to his clothes. His heart beat slow now, not with fear, but with the weight of survival. He had escaped, but he didn't feel free. He felt lost. Wills, mace, wills, wills, mace. There were no stars in hyperspace, just the endless tunnel of light, no beginning, no end. He stared into it, letting the silence soak into his bones, letting his breath even out, letting his mind go still. But it didn't stay still for long. Visions returned. Juno's face, fading. Vader's voice, rising. The feeling of Kamino's rain still falling on his back. They weren't memories anymore. They were pieces of him, and that realization made something tighten in his chest. He had believed escape would mean clarity. Instead, it brought silence, and inside that silence, doubt. Wills, main. In done to poor say. The ship had no identification. No logs, no transponder code. He wasn't sure if it was stolen or simply forgotten. But in a way, it suited him. He had no name, no origin, no record. Just the remnants of someone else's life stitched together in a body that wasn't supposed to feel. But he did feel, and now he was alone with those feelings. The vestibule recells, the stans of the Professors Four, with commissions, the stans of the Professors of Day. He checked the navigation system. Only one planet within safe range. Kato, Nymoidia. Neutral. Remote. Dense cloud cover easy to hide. Hard to track. It wasn't a destination, but it was a beginning. He entered the coordinates and leaned back. Hyperspace blurred. The hum of the engine deepened. And still, he couldn't let go of what Vader had said. You were never meant to choose. But he had chosen. Not vengeance. not rebellion, just movement, away from control, toward something. What? He didn't know. Only that it wouldn't be found in Kamino's labs, or Vader's shadow. The Nessa Beyonds, the Menace of Oz, then the Nessa Beyonds, the Menace of Beyonds, the Menace of Beyonds. He stood and walked through the ship. Every corridor unfamiliar, every sound too loud in the quiet. He found a bunk, sat down, closed his eyes, and listened to the hum of the vessel, to the quiet inside himself. The Force did not speak. It waited, not offering answers, only space. He lay back, not to sleep, but to think, about her, about himself, about what came next. And slowly, breath by breath, he let go of the fear that had kept him caged. Not all of it, not forever, just enough to begin. She spoke to him in the dark, not with words, not with sound, but with the echo of something that shouldn't have survived. Her voice. It came between sleep and waking, when his mind was quiet, and the stars outside moved slow. He never saw her face, only the light around it, but he knew it was her. The same voice that once begged Galen not to leave. The same voice that called him back from death. And now, it was calling again. He didn't know when the dreams became questions. At first, they had only been visions, disconnected flashes, raw with emotion but empty of sequence. But now, they followed him, wove together, became a shape, a presence. Juno Eclipse. Her name sat in his mind like a bruise. She was not part of his training, not in the simulations, not in Vader's commands. The Kaminoans never once mentioned her. And yet she remained, unshakable, undeniable, unexplained. He asked the ship once, whispered her name into the empty cockpit. The navicomputer responded with silence. No records, no logs, no match. She was nowhere, and yet she was everywhere in him. He remembered the way Galen looked at her, not with control, not with fear, with hope, and that made no sense. Hope was a weakness, a flaw in Sith design. But when he thought of her, Starkiller didn't feel weak. He felt human. He tried to push her image away, to ignore the flickers of touch, of voice, of warmth. But it came back harder each time. He remembered her hand on his shoulder before the jump to hyperspace, her voice in his ear during battle, the soft way she said his name, not the number, the name, Galen. And each time he heard it, something inside him cracked. Because she wasn't calling him, she was calling someone else. One night, the silence broke differently. He sat in meditation, eyes closed, breath shallow. The Force pulsed around him, not loud, but rhythmic. And then she appeared, not physically, not clearly, but in the way some people sense a storm coming. Her presence washed through him, and for a heartbeat, he felt her. Not a vision, not a hallucination. Something deeper, memory made flesh. He reached for it, spoke aloud. Juno. No answer, just that quiet hum. That space between thoughts. That ache of something lost. He stood and walked the ship for hours. Every corridor the same. Every surface smooth. Every door closed. But he searched anyway. Not for her. For himself. Because he had to know. Was this longing his? Or just a shadow? Did he miss her? Or was he just remembering how someone else once did? The question gnawed at him. Because if she wasn't real, then maybe he wasn't either. By morning, he made the decision. He would find her. Not to explain. Not to reclaim, but to see. To know if she still lived, if she still remembered, if she would even recognize the face now shaped by someone else's life. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was human. And for once, that felt like enough. He sat in the cockpit, set a course toward the outer rim, and as the stars stretched into hyperspace, her voice followed. Soft, haunting, undeniable. She was gone. That was the first thing he learned. Not dead, not captured, just missing. Vanished from official records, erased from fleet logs, forgotten by every channel that once whispered her name. Juno Eclipse had disappeared after Galen Marek's death. The rebellion scattered. The rogue shadow reassigned. Her command dissolved. No one knew where she went or if she wanted to be found. But Starkiller wasn't searching records. He was following gravity, something deeper than logic. He moved system to system, fragment to fragment. He searched by instinct, because if she still existed, the Force would remember. The first stop was Sullust, a hidden rebel cell operating out of the volcanic caverns. Old allies of Galen Marek. Dangerous, paranoid. He didn't ask for help. He didn't explain who he was. He simply watched, listened, waited. A name came up once, not hers, but the rogue shadow's. Rumors of a woman fleeing an ambush, wounded, flying alone. Not proof, but close enough. He left before they noticed him. They wouldn't have trusted him anyway. No one trusts a man who doesn't know if his face is real. Next came luck, dust, traders, shadows. An old smuggler remembered a woman who matched her description: sharp uniform, imperial posture, rebel edge. Traveled alone, paid well, disappeared into the fog. She was sad, the smuggler said, like someone who stopped expecting to be found. That stayed with him, not because it confirmed anything, but because it sounded like her. Like the woman from his dreams. The one who waited. The one who forgave. He stayed on lock for 3 days, just in case. Then moved on. He searched the old flight logs of the Salvation. The ship Marek had once sacrificed himself aboard. Most files were corrupted. Others had been purged. But one record survived. A refueling request made under a false name. One that matched Eclipse's known aliases. Date: 6 weeks after Galen's death. Location: Polis Massa. A place known for silence. He went there next. The med centers were empty. The docking bays unused. But the memory of her lingered in the walls. He could feel it. He asked no questions. Just wandered the halls until a droid finally approached. Medical record. He nodded. Didn't speak. The droid scanned his face. Paused. Not registered, it said. Of course not. He was no one. He left before security could follow. But as he walked out, he saw a chair in the corner of the waiting room. It meant nothing. But in his mind, she had sat there. Just once. Long enough for the Force to remember. The trail was getting colder. Every system took him farther from certainty, but not from her. Because the more he searched, the more he felt her. Alive. Distant. Watching. He didn't know if it was real. Didn't care. What mattered was the movement. The choice to keep going. To keep believing. Because if she was nowhere, then what had he been fighting for? The planet was called Trask. Small. Out of the way. Forgettable. But the rogue shadow had landed there once, months after the battle on the Death Star. Records didn't say who was flying it, but the signature matched. And Starkiller felt the pull. He landed just before dusk. The sky was red, the wind dry, the town scattered and quiet, full of travelers who didn't ask questions. He didn't ask either. He walked the streets like a shadow, moved through alleys, watched people, listened to conversations. His presence disturbed no one. His face meant nothing. Until he reached the old tavern near the ridge. And someone did recognize him. She was human, older than the vision of Juno, hair graying, face marked by time and heat. But when she looked at him, her eyes narrowed not in suspicion, in memory. "You're him," she said. The words landed like a blow. "I don't know who I am," he replied. She tilted her head. "Then why do you look like someone who's searching?" He didn't speak. She stepped aside, motioned to the seat across from her. He sat. The silence between them was full. "Her name was Juno," the woman said. "She passed through here, didn't stay. Looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Said she lost someone." He closed his eyes. "Did she say who?" "No," the woman answered. "But she said his face wouldn't leave her alone." The silence deepened. Starkiller looked at the table, at his hands, at the skin that wasn't his. "She was kind," the woman continued, "but distant, like the grief never softened." He nodded slowly. "She told me," the woman said, "that she would know he was truly gone the day she stopped dreaming of him." Starkiller looked up. "Did she say where she went?" "She didn't," the woman said, "but she looked over her shoulder when she left, like she hoped someone was following." He left the tavern before nightfall. The sun had vanished behind the cliffs. The air was cold now. He stood beside his ship and tried to breathe. But something was wrong. The hope that had kept him moving was slipping. She had been real. She had remembered. She had even hoped. But not for him. For someone else. For Galen. And he wasn't Galen. No matter how many dreams they shared. He returned to the ship. Didn't power it up. Didn't enter coordinates. Just sat in the silence. Let the realization settle in his chest like weight. He wasn't her memory. He wasn't her future. He was the space in between. The version that was never meant to be held. And suddenly, he understood. Juno Eclipse had loved someone with his face, his voice, his power, but not him. And she never would. He didn't cry, but he wanted to. He didn't scream, but the silence hurt more than sound. He placed a hand on the console, whispered her name once, just to hear it. Juno. Then closed his eyes, and felt the loss settle, not as an error, but as truth. He didn't turn back. There was nowhere to return to. The trail had ended on Trask, not with answers, but with understanding. And now, the only thing left to carry was her name. Juno. It wasn't data. It wasn't a mission. It was something heavier. A name he couldn't say without feeling something fracture beneath it. He whispered it sometimes when he thought no one was listening. Not to call her, but to keep her real. Because the galaxy had moved on, but he hadn't. He drifted for weeks. No destination. Just stars. The cockpit lights dimmed, rations depleted, fuel ran low. But he didn't stop. He wasn't running. He was remembering. And sometimes, remembering was the only thing that kept him alive. Because if she had felt real, even for a moment, then so had he. And he wasn't ready to lose that. Not yet. He tried meditation, silence, isolation. But nothing erased her. Not the cold, not the distance, not even time. Because grief doesn't obey logic, and identity doesn't obey origin. He had not lived the life she remembered, but he carried the echoes of it. And in those echoes was love. Not his, not fully, but still felt. And that feeling refused to die. One night, during a systems diagnostic, he found a corrupted file, tucked deep in the ship's nav history. Audio only. Fragmented, but enough. He played it once. The voice was hers, crisp, low, calm. I don't know if you're out there, Galen. I don't know what they made. But if you're anything like him, don't let them take it from you. Don't let them take you. The file ended. He sat in the dark long after. Not because of the message. Because of the name. Galen. She hadn't spoken his name. She'd spoken to it. But the words had landed inside him. And now they wouldn't leave. He powered down the console. Closed his eyes. Let the silence return. And for the first time, he accepted what he was. Not Galen. Not just a clone. Not just a shadow. But the one who still carried her voice. The one who still dreamed of her. The one who would never be held by her. And still loved her anyway. Because sometimes love wasn't about memory. It was about persistence. And if that was all he had left, it was enough. He didn't mean to enter the war. The galaxy pulled him into it anyway. It started with a distress signal. Not a trap. Not a trick. Just a cry, raw, panicked, real. A rebel convoy under fire. 3 ships. 1 escort. No reinforcements. Pinned near a fuel station in the Dantooine system. Starkiller heard the signal as he passed through the sector. He could have ignored it. Every voice in his mind told him to. The Sith would have let them die. The Jedi would have weighed the consequences. He did neither. He turned the ship and flew straight into the fire. The Empire was already there. TIE fighters swarmed the convoy. A Star Destroyer hung in the distance, massive and unbothered. The battle wasn't even. It wasn't war. It was execution. He powered weapons. No one ordered him to. He didn't think. He chose. His ship broke through the formation like a blade. Lasers tore through the fighters. 1, 2, 4. Engines burst. Wings shattered. The escort ship turned toward him in confusion, not expecting help, not expecting him. The force pulsed around him, sharp and focused. He wasn't here to save the rebellion. He was here to act. He landed aboard the largest rebel transport before it could jump. Its hyperdrive was fried, shields failing, crew panicking. The moment his ship docked, weapons were pointed at the hatch. He stepped through the smoke, hood drawn, lightsaber unlit at his side. No one spoke. They recognized the armor, the face, the presence. Galen Marek, someone whispered. He said nothing, because he didn't know how to answer. They didn't thank him. They didn't welcome him, but they let him stay. And that was more than he expected. He walked the corridors of the transport in silence, watching the wounded, the tired, the ones who had fought too long with too little. He didn't belong among them, but something in him wanted to. Not as a hero, not as a leader, as someone who had bled for something real. They repaired what they could and jumped to hyperspace. Destination, unknown, just away. He stayed on board. Not for protection, but for proof, to see if the cause Galen had died for still mattered. And what he found was not strategy, not hope, but need. People who fought not because they believed they'd win, but because they didn't know how to stop. In the quiet hours, one of the engineers approached him, young, wounded, still bleeding through the bandages on his side. "You're not him," the man said. "Not a question. A truth." "No," Starkiller answered. "But you're something." The man nodded slowly. "Whatever you are, we needed it." Then he walked away, and Starkiller stood alone in the corridor, staring at his reflection in the viewport glass. The stars blurred by, and, for the first time, he wondered. Maybe being something was enough, even if he didn't know what. They remembered the sabers before they remembered the man. Whispers moved through the ship, quiet but persistent. Crew members spoke in half-sentences. Glances lingered longer than they should have. No one said his name aloud anymore, but everyone felt it hanging in the air. Galen Marek. The Rebel Alliance had stories about him. Not clean ones, not heroic ones. Stories passed between survivors, shaped by fear and gratitude in equal measure. A dark warrior who cut through imperial ranks. A Sith who turned. A man who died buying them time. And now, someone who looked exactly like him stood in their halls. Starkiller felt it in every step. He was not a guest, he was a reminder. He kept to himself, moving through the ship when it was quiet. He didn't want to hear the stories, didn't want to know which version of Galen they believed in, because every version made it harder to stay whole. In the engine bay, two mechanics fell silent when he entered. One made the sign of the Force without realizing it. The other stared openly. "You came back," the second one said. Starkiller stopped. "No," he replied. "I didn't." The mechanic frowned, confused. "But you look." "I know," Starkiller said, gently. Not angry, just tired. "I know what I look like." The man nodded slowly and turned back to his work. But the look didn't fade from his face. It was not fear. It was hope, and hope was dangerous. By the third day, the whispers reached command. The transport linked up with a small rebel cell hiding in the Dantooine outskirts. Supplies were transferred, wounded evacuated, and word spread fast. He didn't announce himself, but they felt him arrive. A woman in command fatigues approached him near the ramp. Older, hardened, her eyes sharp, searching his face for something specific. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know," Starkiller answered. She studied him for a long moment. "We buried Galen Marek." "So did I," Starkiller said quietly. That stopped her. "You're not him," she said at last. "No," he replied, "but I carry what he left behind." She exhaled slowly. "That may be worse." They didn't ask him to fight. Not officially. But when an Imperial patrol appeared near the settlement, all eyes turned to him. He felt the pull immediately. Not from the Force. From expectation. This was what Galen would have done. This was who they needed. Starkiller stood at the edge of the clearing, listening to blaster fire in the distance, watching smoke rise into the pale sky. He could walk away. No one would stop him. But then he remembered the engineer's words. "Whatever you are, we needed it." And something inside him answered. He moved through the battlefield like a shadow, lightsaber igniting only when necessary. Blaster bolts bent away from civilians. Troopers disarmed, not killed, when possible. The rebels watched from cover, stunned. This wasn't the weapon from their stories. This was restraint, purpose. When the patrol retreated, the clearing fell silent. No cheers. Just breathing. The woman in command looked at him again. This time, with something like understanding. "You fight like someone who doesn't want to be remembered," she said. Starkiller met her gaze. "I fight like someone who doesn't want to be alone." She nodded once. And for the first time since leaving Camino, Starkiller felt it. Not belonging, but acceptance. The mission wasn't his. He wasn't even supposed to be there. But the rebels were stretched thin, another convoy ambushed, supplies stolen, one of their own taken. A young commander captured during a sabotage run gone wrong. Interrogation was guaranteed. Execution likely. They didn't ask Starkiller for help. They didn't have to. He listened in silence as the mission brief played over a cracked holotable. The outpost was small, Imperial detachment, light shielding, nothing strategic. But the risk was too high for a full assault. Volunteers were few. The window was closing. Starkiller stood, wordless. No orders. No plea. He just moved toward the ship. He landed just after midnight. The moonlight was thin. The landscape quiet. A single garrison outpost carved into the cliffs, guarded by half-asleep troops who didn't expect anyone to come. He didn't go through the front. He moved like breath through the back corridors. Silent, focused. The force bent around him. Cameras failed. Locks disengaged. He found the cell 2 levels below ground. The prisoner was barely conscious. Blood dried at the corners of his mouth. One arm clearly broken. He didn't react when Starkiller entered. Just opened one eye. And flinched. "You," he whispered. "Not who you think," Starkiller said. The man didn't respond. Just stared. "You're not him," the prisoner finally said. "But you fight like him." "I don't fight for the same reasons," Starkiller answered. The cell opened. The man didn't move. "Why?" he asked. Starkiller paused and spoke the truth. "Because I could leave, and I didn't." They made it out without alerting the base. No alarms. No trail. No deaths. The rebel lay in the medbay the entire return trip, staring at the ceiling. Starkiller didn't ask questions, didn't need answers. But just before they reached orbit, the man sat up. "You saved someone who didn't believe you existed," he said. "Why?" Starkiller looked at him. "I don't save people," he replied. "I choose people." The man smiled weakly. "And you chose me." "No," Starkiller said. "I chose not to be the one who looked away." The crew greeted them with disbelief. Then relief. No applause. No celebrations. Just quiet thanks. Nods. The kind that meant everything. The kind Starkiller had never known. The rebel he rescued refused a stretcher. Walked past his commander and straight to Starkiller. Stopped. Held out a hand. "I don't know what you are," he said. "But I'll follow you. If you'll lead." Starkiller stared at the hand. Didn't take it. Didn't reject it. Just nodded. And walked on. That night, alone in the hold, he sat beside the ship's systems console and stared at the stars. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel anything. But for the first time, he understood. Not the war, not the cause, but the power of one decision. To step forward, instead of away. Not because it was right, but because it meant something. Even if no one remembered. Even if no one ever knew. The message came without warning. Not through the Force. Not through whispers. Through signal. Imperial encryption. Broken within seconds. A voice embedded in static. "You cannot run forever." It was Vader. Not angry. Patient. Like someone speaking to a storm, waiting for it to pass. "You are still mine," the voice said. "No matter what mask you wear." Starkiller didn't respond. He powered down the console and stared into the darkness. Vader wasn't wrong, but he wasn't right either. Because Starkiller no longer wore a mask. He wore memory. And memory was harder to kill. The rebellion watched him now. Not with fear, not with trust, with calculation. He had become too useful to ignore, too dangerous to fully accept. A man with no rank, no history, and a face that reminded them of sacrifice. Some wanted to keep him close, others wanted him gone, but none of them truly knew what he was. Because he didn't know either. The next mission was simple. A recon post, supply drop, routine. Until the Empire arrived early. Blasters lit the sky, turrets spun wildly, the jungle erupted into fire. Starkiller didn't wait for orders. He moved, pushed forward, shielded the retreat, held the line alone. The enemy fell, but so did his mask. A burst of lightning cracked the battlefield open. Soldiers, friend, and foe stared in awe. This wasn't rebellion. This was power, and power always drew eyes. They asked him afterward, not if he was Sith, not if he was Jedi, but what side he was on. He had no answer, because the truth didn't fit in sides. He wasn't reborn. He wasn't redeemed. He was becoming, every day, a little farther from the Kamino labs. Every day, a little closer to something he couldn't name. Some days he felt the dark whisper again. Other days he remembered Juno's voice. But most days he heard nothing. Just breath, just silence, just space to choose. He stood alone at the edge of a rebel camp that night, watching the stars, wondering if anyone out there still remembered the man he looked like. If anyone still mourned Galen Marek, and if they did, would they ever accept someone who carried his face but not his fate? He didn't know. He only knew one thing. He was not finished. He wasn't a Sith. He wasn't a Jedi. He wasn't even a soldier. He was the space between, the shadow of a shadow, and maybe the beginning of something else entirely. It happened without sound. No alarms, no alerts, no warning. He had just returned from a minor recon, a rebel outpost, quiet skies, low risk. He'd landed alone, as always, and stepped down into the dust. And then, the air changed. It wasn't cold. It wasn't heavy. It was empty, like the Force itself had inhaled. He turned slowly, hand near his saber. But it was already too late. Vader stood between him and the ship, no blade drawn, no words spoken, just presence, absolute, crushing, familiar. Starkiller froze, not in fear, in memory, because this wasn't the first time he'd seen that silhouette. It was the same presence from Camino, from dreams, from the visions that haunted him. But this time, it wasn't a vision. It was him, Darth Vader, the master who created him, the shadow that refused to let go. He moved on instinct, saber igniting, steps back, breath tight. Vader didn't move, just lifted one hand. The ground split beneath Starkiller's feet. The Force slammed into his chest. He flew backward into the hull of the transport. Metal bent, his body folded in pain. But he stood, bleeding, shaking, still defiant. "Why now?" he asked. Vader stepped forward. "You were never lost," he said, "only wandering." Starkiller raised his saber again. "Then why didn't you stop me sooner?" Vader's voice was colder than the wind. "Because I wanted to see what you would choose." The blade trembled in Starkiller's hand. "And now?" Vader raised his other hand. "Now I choose." The Force crushed him. Not like a blow, like gravity, unyielding, inescapable. His saber dropped, his knees buckled, his body slammed to the ground, still breathing, still conscious. but pinned, like an insect beneath glass. Vader stepped closer. You believed you were becoming. Starkiller gasped for air. I was. Vader leaned near. You are nothing. The world faded, not to black, to memory. Rain, glass, Camino. The first cell, the first scream, and then silence. Starkiller closed his eyes. Not in surrender, in preparation. Because whatever came next, he would face it and remember it. Even if it broke him, he woke in water, not drowning, not floating, suspended. Like before, like the beginning, the tank hissed as it drained. His eyes burned, muscles ached. The glass around him shimmered with faint reflections, dozens of them. He was not alone. He wasn't the only one in a tank. And he wasn't the only one that looked like him. The lab was colder than he remembered. The light dimmer. The silence heavier. He stepped forward, knees unsteady, and turned to face the rows. 6 tanks, 7. More behind the wall. Each one held a body. Some fully formed. Others bloated, twisted, incomplete. All of them were him. Not copies. Not imitations. Failures. One of them had no eyes. Another twitched violently, jaw clenched. A third looked peaceful but didn't breathe. He backed away, hit the glass of his own tank, and felt his breath leave him. Because the truth had always been buried. He was never the only one. Only the one who survived. The door behind him opened. Vader entered without sound. No threats. No anger. Just control. This is what remains, he said. Starkiller didn't move. You told me I was different. You were. You told me I was made to replace him. You were. Starkiller's voice cracked. Then what are they? Vader's answer was simple. They are what came before you. He walked between the tanks like a teacher through a lesson. The process was flawed. The bond between memory and body, unstable. They remembered too much, or not enough. He stopped beside the worst failure. A clone with skin peeled and healing, twitching in place. This one believed it was Marek. It killed 2 of our own before collapsing. He turned to another. This one rejected its own mind, tried to erase itself. He kept walking. Most didn't make it this far. He faced Starkiller. You did. Starkiller shook his head. This isn't survival. It's proof, Vader replied. Of what? That you are not unique. Starkiller stepped back. The tanks loomed behind him, and something inside him broke. Not in pain, in identity. Because the question he thought he'd answered, who am I, wasn't a question anymore. It was a lie. You remember her, Vader said. Juno, Starkiller whispered. Vader nodded. So did they. All of them. He gestured toward the others. Every clone reached for her. He pointed at Starkiller's chest. But only you kept her. The silence returned. He didn't cry, didn't speak. Just looked at the ones who didn't survive, and understood that surviving wasn't enough. Not anymore. The dark was no longer outside him. It was in him. Vader didn't chain his body. He chained his thoughts. Starkiller was allowed to walk, speak, even sleep, but never leave, never train, never remember without permission. The cell was empty, not in space, in sensation. No sound, no lights, no force, just silence. And in silence, the mind unravels. He dreamed of things that didn't happen, felt memories that weren't his. Voices whispered Juno's name, but they weren't hers. They were fragments, distortions, rewrites. Vader wasn't torturing him with pain. He was torturing him with doubt. Every time Starkiller tried to remember the past, something shifted. Juno's eyes turned gold. Kata's voice became Vader's. The ship wasn't the rogue shadow, it was Camino. And it was always raining. He woke screaming one night, thought he was on fire, but his skin was cold. Too cold. Like the tank, like death. He clawed at his arms, looking for the burns. There were none. Only the fading echo of a memory that never existed. Or one that was being erased. You cannot fight the truth, Vader said. He stood in the doorway. Not angry, just present. Starkiller didn't answer. He couldn't trust his voice anymore. Vader stepped closer. You were not born. You were made. You said I was different. You were closer. To what? Vader raised his hand. Perfection. The next session wasn't pain. It was light. Images flooded his mind. Childhoods, training halls, deaths. None of them his. But they felt real. He saw a Jedi girl in his arms. He saw Juno kiss him and vanish into smoke. He saw Vader remove his mask and reveal Marek's face beneath. He screamed, but no sound came. Only memory. False. Manufactured. Overwritten. He stopped eating. Stopped speaking. Let the visions win. Because if they were lies, he had no proof. And if they were truth, then maybe he didn't want to be this. Not a clone. Not a warrior. Just nothing. But then he saw it. Not in the dark. In the reflection. A mark on his palm. Small. Burned. A memory triggered by skin, not mind. He touched it. And heard her voice. I don't care what you were. You're you. That's enough. He blinked. The memory stayed. Not distorted. Not fading. Real. And, with that memory, came another. Of fighting back. He escaped without moving. Not through doors. Not through guards. Through the Force. For days he had resisted it. Fearing it was false. Fearing he was false. But the Force had never lied. People did. Machines did. Even memories. But the Force only revealed. He opened himself again, and what returned was her. Not her face, not her words, her presence. A warmth inside the cold. A steady breath beneath the storm. She wasn't speaking to him. She was waiting. Juno wasn't just a memory. She was a direction. A tether the others didn't have. The others fell because they forgot who they were chasing. He never did. The cell door hissed. A test. 2 guards. No words. They gave him space to walk. He didn't run. Didn't strike. Just moved. Like he was expected to. Until he turned the wrong way. Took the wrong door. Triggered the right alarm. They shouted. He didn't. He moved like someone who had already fought this battle. Because he had. In another life. In another body. He didn't remember the moves. His body did. A leap. A strike. A pull of lightning that left silence behind. And then. The corridor. A ship. A console. Escape. But not yet. He stopped at the tank room. Looked at them one last time. The others. The ones who didn't make it. The ones who screamed. The ones who never woke. He pressed his hand to the glass and felt nothing. Because they were not him. Not anymore. The launch pad opened. Rain met his face. And a memory fell with it. Not Camino. Felucia. A battle. A choice. A kiss. Who knew? She wasn't gone. She was somewhere beyond this. somewhere waiting, not for Galen Marek, not for a clone, for him. He took the ship, didn't check coordinates. He didn't need to. The Force was enough. It guided his hands, not like destiny, like instinct. And in that moment, he became real. Not because Vader let him, not because Marek's shadow blessed him, because he chose, and in the darkness of hyperspace, he whispered her name. Once, like a prayer, not to summon her, but to remind himself that she was the only thing that wasn't a lie, that as long as she was out there, so was he. The clouds above Camino never change. They swirl, they crash, they bleed thunder and lightning, but they do not change. Just like the place beneath them, the domes, the platforms, the sterile halls where he was created, where he died, where he was born again. He returns now, not because someone ordered him to, not because he was summoned or programmed or trained. He returns because he needs to, because whatever happened here, it's still inside him. The storm is louder than he remembers, or maybe he just hears it differently now. The Force is alive in his mind, twisting through each memory like static. Kamino doesn't welcome him. It never did. It simply accepts him like rain accepts the ocean. He steps off the ship alone. No rebels, no plan. Just a feeling that something has to end here. The clone platforms stretch out like scars across the water. Rows of turbolights hum in the distance. Droids move in pre-programmed patterns, unaware that something has changed, that he has changed. It feels wrong to be here, but it also feels inevitable. He walks slowly, eyes scanning the storm. The air is electric, not just from the weather, from the pressure of fate closing in. This is where they made him. Not just once, not just him. Hundreds, thousands. He was just one of many. But somehow, he lived. Somehow, he remembered. Why? Why him? He doesn't have answers. Only footsteps. Each one echoes like a countdown. Then he feels it. That cold presence. Like the shadow of a blade across the spine. Vader. He doesn't see him yet. But he knows. He's here. The Force doesn't lie. It trembles when he's near. Starkiller stops at the edge of the primary platform. Lightning splits the sky behind him. He looks out across the endless rain, and there, standing in silence, is the man who raised him, broke him, and tried to erase him. Darth Vader. Their eyes meet. No words. None are needed. This isn't a reunion. It's a reckoning. The platform between them hums with tension. Starkiller's hand hovers near his saber. But he doesn't ignite it yet. Not out of fear. Out of purpose. Because this can't start until he understands why it must end. Why? He asks, his voice barely audible over the storm. Vader doesn't move. You created me, lied to me, used me, then tried again. Why? Vader's voice is still, calm, and colder than the rain. Because the galaxy does not need weakness. The words cut deeper than any lightsaber. Starkiller steps forward, his eyes locked on the man he once called master. I wasn't weak, he says. You were attached. Vader takes a single step. The lights on his chest flicker. The hiss of his respirator sounds like judgment. Attachment breeds failure. The storm howls around them. Starkiller's grip tightens. I loved her. Vader says nothing. He doesn't need to. That silence is his answer. 1,000 memories crash into Starkiller at once. Juno's face, her voice, the way she looked at him like he was real, like he was more than a shadow, more than a weapon. And now, That memory is the only thing he trusts. He ignites his saber. So does Vader. The red and blue light clash against the silver rain. No more waiting. No more running. No more questions. Only the storm. Only the sabers. Only the end of what began here. The first clash is like thunder given shape. Saber strikes saber, and the impact ripples outward, shaking the rain from the sky. Vader doesn't hesitate. He never did. His strength is cold, precise, absolute. Starkiller meets it head-on, but this time, he isn't trying to win his approval. He's trying to erase what Vader built. Each swing tells a story. Vader's movements are heavier now, not slower, just burdened. Like the armor weighs more than metal. Like every strike is a sentence, not just a command. "You are still my apprentice," Vader says between blows. Starkiller ducks under a crimson arc, then rolls and counters. His saber snaps forward, grazing Vader's shoulder plate. Sparks fly. "I was never yours," he answers. But the words sting, because they aren't entirely true. He was Vader's, not by choice but by design. His instincts, his training, even his rage, they all came from the same source. He breaks away, panting, drenched in storm water. Vader advances, unrelenting. "You exist because I allowed it." Starkiller's saber hums louder as his anger rises. "No," he says. "I exist because she believed in me." The response slows Vader, if only for a second. That second is enough. Starkiller lunges, saber high, but Vader turns, catching the blow with brutal force. He twists, sends Starkiller flying across the platform. The impact cracks Dura steel. He groans, lifts himself. This isn't about power. It never was. He could beat Vader and still lose. If he became what Vader made him to be. The air is alive with lightning. Kamino's towers burn in the distance. Clone tanks rumble far below, unaware of the gods fighting above them. Starkiller charges again. Their sabers collide, again and again, red and blue, fury and defiance. Vader forces him back with sheer strength. "You cannot escape what you are." Starkiller parries, dodges. "Then I'll destroy it." Vader slams him down. The saber flies from his hand. He gasps as air rushes from his lungs. Vader stands over him, saber raised. "This is mercy," the Sith says. But Starkiller's hand doesn't reach for his weapon. It reaches inward. He closes his eyes. He thinks of Juno, her smile, her touch, the way she said his name like it meant something. He lets go of the hate, lets go of the fear, and in that breath the Force floods him. Not like a weapon, like memory. Vader strikes, but Starkiller's saber leaps back to his hand, meeting the blow just in time. Their blades lock again. But now something's different. The storm no longer deafens him. The pain no longer weakens him. He sees. "You failed," he whispers. "You tried to build a shadow, but you made a man." Vader snarls, the first true emotion he's shown. Then D-like one. They fight again, faster, harsher, the edge of the platform crumbling beneath their feet. Every movement feels like the end of something old, the death of obedience, the death of silence. Starkiller ducks under Vader's guard and slams the hilt of his saber into the control node on his chest plate. Sparks explode. Vader stumbles, gasping. But Starkiller doesn't press the advantage. He steps back, because killing Vader isn't the goal. Ending him is. And that won't happen with violence. It happens when he refuses to kneel. Vader rises slowly. They stare at each other. No more words, just truth between them. The apprentice is gone. The clone is gone. All that remains is the man who walked into the storm and didn't become the lightning. Vader does not retreat. Even damaged, even sparking, he stands like the storm itself, immovable, inevitable. Rain streams down his armor, hissing against exposed circuitry. The platform groans beneath them, warning that it cannot hold much longer. This ends the same way it always does, Vader says. Starkiller steadies his breath. No, he answers. This ends differently. Vader advances again, slower now, but more deliberate. Every step is heavy, measured. Not rage, not desperation. Control. This is not a duel meant to be won quickly. This is instruction. Vader attacks without warning, forcing Starkiller backward with crushing blows. Each strike tests him, punishes hesitation, hunts for weakness. Starkiller blocks, but barely. The strength behind Vader's blade rattles his arms, drives him closer to the platform's edge. You feel it, Vader says. The pull to strike, to finish it, to prove yourself. Lightning splits the sky. Yes, Starkiller replies, voice strained. I feel it. Vader presses harder. Give in, he commands. End this, end me. Become what you were meant to be. The words echo inside Starkiller's mind not as commands, but as memories. Kamino's halls, the tanks, the failed clones, the endless conditioning. Every lesson had pointed to this moment. Kill your master. Take his place. Become power. Starkiller's saber shakes. He could do it. The thought is clear, simple, tempting, and that is why he doesn't. He steps sideways, letting Vader's strike pass, then twists the force around them not to attack, but to unbalance. Vader stumbles as the ground beneath his feet fractures. This is not how Sith fight. Vader recovers quickly, anger bleeding through his control. You hesitate, he snarls. That is why you will fail. No, Starkiller says. That's why you already did. They clash again, but something has shifted. Vader's blows are precise, but Starkiller's movements are fluid, adaptive. He no longer fights like an apprentice. He fights like someone choosing every action. You taught me strength, Starkiller says between strikes. You taught me fear. Vader swings low, then high. Starkiller blocks both. But you never taught me why. Vader roars and unleashes the force. Starkiller is thrown across the platform, slamming hard into a support column. Pain explodes through his back. His saber skids across the rain-slick floor. Vader approaches, towering, unstoppable. This is the final lesson, he says. Power is all that matters. Starkiller struggles to his knees. No, he says softly. Meaning is. Vader raises his blade. And in that instant, Starkiller understands. This is not about defeating Vader. This is about refusing to become him. He closes his eyes. Not in surrender. In clarity. He reaches for the Force again, not as rage, not as lightning, but as memory, as connection, as everything Vader tried to strip away. The rain slows. The storm quiets. Starkiller opens his eyes. And when Vader strikes, Starkiller does not counter. He steps aside. The blade misses. Vader stumbles forward, shocked, and for the first time, afraid, because his final lesson has failed. Not because his student was weak, but because his student chose to be more. The lightning fades, not gone, just distant now. Like a memory the storm no longer wants to carry. Starkiller stands over Vader. His saber is not ignited. His hands are still. There is no victory pose, no triumphant scream. Just breath, rain, silence. Vader does not rise. For the first time in Starkiller's life, the dark shape on the ground looks smaller, not because of wounds, but because of what it never was. A father, a teacher, a purpose. You were supposed to control me, Starkiller says quietly. But you only built a mirror. The words aren't defiance. They're grief. The wind moves through broken steel as if mourning. Somewhere below, the cloning vats rupture, spilling their lifeless copies into the black ocean. All those failed versions of him, the ones that screamed without souls, the ones who never asked why. Only he survived. Not because he was stronger, but because he remembered something the others didn't. Juno. He doesn't know if she's alive, doesn't know if the feelings inside him are real, or just another layer of programming. But they feel real. And maybe that's what matters. Because the Force doesn't remember files or orders. It remembers echoes. And in this moment, standing over the man who tried to erase him, Starkiller is not a clone, not a project, not a failed weapon. He is a wound in the Force that refuses to close. Vader shifts slightly, groaning. Damaged circuits spark near his side. The mask is intact, but the voice inside it is weaker now, less machine, more breath. You have nothing, Vader rasps. Starkiller kneels beside him. I have choice. The mask turns toward him. That's what made you weak. No, Starkiller whispers. It's what made me real. He doesn't kill Vader, because killing him would mean Vader still has control. And Starkiller is done being shaped by another man's fear. Instead, he rises. Behind him, the storm begins to break, clouds pulling apart like curtains after a tragedy. The ocean below churns with debris, but the sky finally shows light. Starkiller walks away. Every step echoes louder than thunder. The cloning facility collapses behind him, piece by piece. Flooded chambers sink into blackness, failed lives erased. The Empire's experiment undone not by rebellion, but by self-awareness. He reaches the hangar. A stolen ship waits, unarmed, weathered, almost forgotten like him. He boards without looking back, because there's nothing left to return to. He sets the course, nowhere specific, just away. And as the ship lifts into the sky, the rain on Camino stops. It doesn't fall in anger anymore. It falls like release, because something new was born here. Not a soldier, not a Jedi, not a Sith, just a man who refused to become what they told him he was. And the Force remembers that. It will carry this echo through time, so that someday someone else might hear it and choose not to follow the path carved in pain. Because the storm always comes back, but so does the spark. The storm had passed, but its echo remained in the metal. Lightning still danced in the skies over Camino, far off now, like an angry memory fading into the distance. Rain tapped against the transparent steel above, softer now, more like a whisper than the roar it had once been. And in the center of the platform, where thunder had clashed with destiny, Vader lay crumpled, breathing, barely. Starkiller stood over him, his chest rising and falling too fast, too uneven. Not from exhaustion, not anymore. The fight was over. The rage had run dry. But something else filled its place, something colder, something older, something harder to define. He stared down at the man who had shaped every shadow in his life. The black armor was cracked at the shoulder, sparking in the rain. The helmet was intact, but he could hear the broken rhythm inside. Vader lived, and for the first time, Starkiller didn't know what to do. He had imagined this moment many times, not consciously, but somewhere deep inside, like an echo built into his cells. He had seen himself standing over Vader's body, victorious, whole, complete. But the reality was hollow. There was no triumph here, only silence, only questions. Was it over? Could it be? He remembered Camino not as a place, but as a wound. The tubes, the failed clones, the fragments of lives that never became real. All made in service to this one man. Or maybe not even a man. A machine. A relic. A symbol of everything the galaxy feared. And everything Starkiller once served. His saber was still in his hand. The blade still hummed, though lower now, quieter. A whisper of light in the dark. One movement, one breath, one choice, and it would be done. But he didn't move. Instead, he looked beyond Vader at the scorched floor. The twisted metal. The remnants of the battle that had nearly killed them both. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a question with no right answer. He thought of Juno, her face, her voice, the way she had looked at him, not as a clone, not as a weapon, but as a man. He didn't know if the feelings were truly his or borrowed from the original Galen Marek. But they were real enough to hurt, real enough to guide him here, real enough to stop him from ending this. That terrified him. Because if he let Vader live, what did that make him? A Jedi. He didn't know what that word meant anymore. He had killed too many to wear that title, and yet he had spared too many to still be Sith. He stepped back, just once. The wind shifted around him, as if the Force itself hesitated. Vader stirred. A slow, grinding breath. A movement of the fingers. The broken Titan refused to die. Even now, Starkiller's fingers tightened around his saber. "Why won't you stop?" he whispered. It wasn't a question for Vader, it was for himself. He could feel the anger pulling at him again. Not raw, not wild, but deep, heavy, like gravity, like something placed there on purpose. He thought about all the other clones, the ones that didn't make it, the ones whose minds had cracked, the ones who had begged for freedom in voices that sounded just like his. He wasn't the best of them, just the last. And maybe that's what Vader wanted all along. Not a perfect apprentice, just a survivor. He stepped forward again. His saber lit the edge of Vader's chest plate in a pale, cold glow. The next breath could be his last. But Starkiller didn't raise the blade. Instead, he looked up past the storm, past the rain, into the sky that stretched over a galaxy on fire. A galaxy that still didn't know who he was. He turned off the saber. The hum faded. The wind returned. And in that silence, something inside him shifted. Not peace, not yet, but space for it. He stepped back again. And this time, he didn't stop. Behind him, Vader lay motionless, alive, defeated, but not finished. Starkiller didn't look back. Not yet. The sky over Camino had started to clear, but the war had already found its next breath. Starkiller stood near the edge of the platform, away from Vader's broken body, eyes lost in the shifting clouds. His hand gripped nothing. The saber was clipped to his belt, quiet for now. A weapon asleep, just like the one who'd made him. He didn't turn when the sound of ships cut through the air. He already knew who it was. The rebellion. He could feel their presence before the transports even touched down. The fear, the urgency, the hope tangled with hesitation. It wasn't victory they brought, it was expectation. As the ramp lowered, the first to step out was Kato. His face was older, more weathered, but still carried the same fire. It always had the fire of a man who had lost everything and still kept walking. His eyes met Starkiller's, and for a moment there was silence. Then he saw Vader, and all silence ended. "You did it," Kato said, voice flat. "He's alive." Starkiller nodded once. He was defeated. "That's enough." Kato didn't agree. Starkiller could see it in his posture, in the way he kept his hand near his sidearm, even now. "Alive means leverage," the general said. "Alive means we can end this war faster than we started it." Other rebels moved past him now, cautious but urgent. Medics, officers, soldiers. None dared get too close to the Sith Lord, but all of them stared, not with pity, with calculation. Starkiller's stomach turned. "He's not leverage," he said quietly. "He's more than that," Kato replied. "He's proof that the Empire can bleed, that the darkest thing in the galaxy isn't invincible." "And what happens when you put him in a cage?" Starkiller asked, voice low. "What happens when he escapes? What happens when he turns it all back against you?" Kato didn't answer right away. He didn't have to. The look on his face said enough. This was war, and wars weren't won with mercy. "He's dangerous," Starkiller continued. "You think you can use him, but he's been using people like you since before you were born." Kato stepped closer. "And what are you, Starkiller? His mistake, his ghost?" There was no venom in the words, only challenge. Starkiller didn't flinch. "I'm done being anything of his." The medics approached Vader, scanning, stabilizing, preparing to move him. One reached to restrain him, and Starkiller's body shifted without thinking a single step forward, protective. But he stopped himself. Even now, he didn't know why. Was it habit? Was it guilt? Or was it the part of him that still remembered being a child raised by this monster, and somehow surviving? The others didn't see it that way. To them, Vader wasn't a man, he was a prize. And Starkiller, he was just the one who delivered him. Leia arrived minutes later. Her expression was composed, but her eyes said everything: tired, wary, quietly furious. "You should have killed him," she said. "No accusation, just fact." "I almost did," Starkiller replied. "Why didn't you?" He looked at her, the question hanging heavy between them. "I didn't want to become him." Leia nodded. A pause. "Then don't stand in our way." It wasn't a threat, it was a boundary. And Starkiller realized something then. The rebellion didn't see him as one of them. Not really. He was useful, maybe even necessary, but never trusted. Not entirely. And perhaps they were right. He turned away again, walking back toward the edge of the platform. The sea below raged quietly, a mirror of everything inside him. They would take Vader. They would try to keep him locked away. And the war would go on. But Starkiller's war had changed. He wasn't here to win anymore. He was here to understand, to find something inside himself that wasn't made in a lab or trained in darkness. Something real, even if it hurt. Especially if it hurt. Night fell slowly over Camino, though the planet never truly slept. The clouds closed again, sealing the stars behind layers of gray. The rebellion had moved Vader into containment below, layers of shields and restraints humming softly through the structure. Guards stood watch. Orders were given. Plans were made. And Starkiller was alone. He stood in a narrow observation corridor, looking through reinforced glass at the dark shape held within the chamber. Vader was suspended upright, bound by energy fields, his breathing steadier now, controlled by machines that hated him almost as much as the people operating them. This was what victory looked like. And it tasted wrong. Starkiller pressed his palm against the glass. The hum vibrated through his bones. He could feel Vader's presence even now, dimmed but unbroken, like a star collapsing inward, refusing to disappear. This was the moment vengeance waited for. Not the heat of battle, not the chaos of storms and sabers, but quiet, stillness, the chance to choose cruelty without resistance. He imagined it clearly, the blade igniting, the field failing, the final strike. He imagined the release, the sudden silence where Vader's presence ended forever, the galaxy lighter by one shadow, the ghosts of Camino finally laid to rest. He wanted it. That truth frightened him more than anything else. Because the desire didn't feel like rage. It felt calm, reasonable, earned. Vengeance always does. You know what he is, a voice said behind him. Starkiller didn't turn. He knew who it was. Kato stepped closer, stopping just short of the glass. You know what he's done. How many worlds burned because he chose obedience over mercy? Starkiller nodded once. I know. Then why are you still standing here? Kato asked. Why isn't he dead? The question wasn't accusation. It was confusion. Starkiller searched for an answer and found only fragments. Because killing him won't undo what he made, he said finally. Kato scoffed quietly. It'll stop him from making more. Will it? Starkiller asked. Or will it just make another story someone tells to justify the next war? Kato said nothing. The silence stretched. I wanted him to suffer, Starkiller admitted. I wanted him to know what he took from me, from all of us. Kato looked at him now, really looked. Not as a weapon, not as a symbol, as someone who had survived something terrible and didn't know how to carry it. And? Kato asked. And I realized something, Starkiller said. He doesn't feel it the way I do. Vader shifted inside the field, as if sensing them. His head lifted slightly. The mask remained unreadable. He doesn't regret. Starkiller continued. He doesn't mourn. He doesn't break. Kato's jaw tightened. So we lock him away. And let him live knowing he won. Starkiller asked. No, Kato said. Let him live knowing he failed. The words landed heavier than expected. Starkiller looked back at Vader. Had he failed? Or was this exactly how it always ended? Others choosing his fate. Others deciding what justice looked like. The thought twisted inside him. Because once, someone had done the same to him. He stepped back from the glass. I don't know what justice is, he said. But I know what becoming him looks like. Kato watched him carefully. You're not him. I was built to be, Starkiller replied. And every time I choose violence because it feels right, I get closer. Kato exhaled slowly. Then what are you going to do? Starkiller closed his eyes. In the darkness, he saw Juno's face again. Not smiling, not crying, just watching, waiting. I'm going to walk away, he said. Kato frowned. From this? From him, Starkiller answered. If I stay, I'll choose wrong. Kato studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Sometimes, he said, walking away is the hardest fight. Starkiller opened his eyes. Vader remained behind the glass, alive, defeated, unrepentant. And for the first time, Starkiller didn't feel the need to end him. Not because Vader deserved mercy, but because Starkiller deserved something better than vengeance. The room was silent. Just the distant hum of machinery, the crackle of dying sparks, and the sound of his own breathing. Starkiller stood alone, Vader at his feet. The battle was over. The storm had passed. But the decision, the one that mattered most, was still ahead. He looked down at the broken armor, the cracked mask, the chest plate barely rising and falling. Vader was alive. Barely. Somehow. Not by mercy, but by design. The Force refused to let him go. And Starkiller didn't know if that was a gift or a curse. He raised his lightsaber. One ignition. One motion. That's all it would take. He told himself it was justice, for the lies, for the manipulation, for Juno, for every clone that died before him, for the real Galen Marek, who never got the chance to choose. But his hand trembled. Because behind the mask wasn't just Vader. It was the shadow of everything Starkiller used to be. The rage, the servitude, the fear. If he struck now, would he be destroying his past, or surrendering to it? The door behind him opened. Rebel officers stepped in, slow and cautious. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Their eyes said enough. They wanted Vader alive, for interrogation, for leverage, for war. He had become a prisoner of value, a relic of the Empire. And they wanted him in chains, not destroyed. Not yet. Bail Organa was among them, calm, controlled, his voice low and diplomatic. If we can get him to speak, we can end this faster. Think of how many lives could be spared. It sounded logical, sensible, but something inside Starkiller recoiled. He didn't trust Vader's words. He barely trusted his own memories. And that was the real war now. Not against the Empire, not even against his creator, but against the voices that lived in him: Galen's hopes, Vader's commands, Juno's love, Proxy's loyalty. He wasn't sure which ones were real, or, if any, were his. He took a step back from the body, the saber still lit. "What am I if I let him live?" he asked quietly. Nobody answered. They couldn't. He wasn't asking them anyway. The Force moved gently through him. Not as command, not as fury, just presence. Like a hand on his shoulder. Not pulling, not pushing, just waiting. Vader groaned. A whisper of breath through shattered machinery. He was conscious. Starkiller dropped to one knee. Their eyes met through the half-broken lens of a Sith Lord's mask and the eyes of a clone who was never supposed to exist. For the first time, there was no lightning, no hate, just a quiet weight between them. "You made me to be your weapon," Starkiller said. "But I became something else." Vader said nothing, but his silence was not empty, it was acknowledgement. A kind of surrender. Maybe not to death, but to fate. Starkiller stood again. He turned off his saber and walked away. The rebels surged forward, restraints ready, medical teams behind them. Starkiller didn't look back. He stepped into the corridor, alone. The ship shook slightly as it moved out of Camino's gravity. The storm was finally behind them. The sky outside was clear. He didn't know what would happen to Vader, whether justice would be served, or power would be traded for another name. The galaxy didn't run on fairness. Not anymore. Maybe it never did. But for the first time, Starkiller wasn't reacting. He was choosing. Not out of hate, not out of love, just out of himself. Juno was out there, maybe still alive. Maybe not. He didn't need her to save him. But she reminded him that he could be more. That he didn't have to be a slave to a past he never asked for. And maybe that was enough. He walked past the rebel soldiers, past the briefing rooms, past the celebratory whispers that already tried to crown him a hero. He didn't feel like one. He didn't want to be one. He just wanted peace. Whatever that looked like. In a quiet hallway near the escape pods, Proxy waited. Starkiller paused. The droid's eyes flickered. You made the right choice, Master. Starkiller gave a tired smile. I didn't make the right choice. I just made a choice. Proxy nodded. That's what makes it yours. Together, they stepped onto the ship bound for somewhere anywhere else. Behind them, Vader lived. But so did Starkiller. And for once, that was enough. The last confirmed signal came from the edge of the outer rim. It was faint, fragmented, not enough to trace, but just enough to prove one thing: he was still alive. At least for a moment. It came through a scrambled comm relay once used by separatist forces during the Clone Wars. The station had been decommissioned decades ago, but someone had reactivated it. No known starship registry. No accompanying data packets. Just a single burst of code. One that matched the encryption Starkiller once used when he communicated with Juno Eclipse. No words. No voice. Only silence and static, wrapped in the familiar rhythm of a signal that should not exist. The kind of echo that makes you stop breathing. The kind that feels like a ghost brushing against the edge of the galaxy. The transmission was logged by a deep space scout vessel from the New Republic. The crew didn't recognize it. They forwarded it to Coruscant, where a few aging intelligence officers raised their eyebrows and said nothing. And then the file disappeared. The rebellion had buried the story of Starkiller long ago. Officially, he never existed. There were no records of his birth, no hollows of his training, no trace of his missions for Vader. But those who were there, those who saw what he could do, never forgot. Not the Jedi who had barely survived his wrath. Not the soldiers who watched him tear ships from the sky. And not Juno Eclipse, who waited long after the wars were over. When the signal reached her hands, she didn't say a word. She just stared at the data stream, like it might start speaking if she waited long enough. She had moved on. Or tried to. But that sound, the pattern, the pause, the way it cracked at the end, she knew it. It was him. But the coordinates made no sense. The source came from a system with no known settlements, no military activity, no Jedi ruins. Just a swirl of debris and iron storms left behind by some forgotten celestial event. A place where no one should be. A place where he would go. Some say she left that night, without telling anyone. Others claim she vanished months before, and that the signal was her final act, a decoy, a distraction, a goodbye. The truth is buried under stories. And in those stories, Starkiller becomes a shadow again. A man chasing a ghost until he became one. But the signal was real. That much can't be denied. An encrypted burst of code, triggered by hand. That's what makes it impossible to ignore. It wasn't a loop. It wasn't a trap. It was a message, silent but deliberate. The kind of message you only send when you know there's no coming back. Some believe it was a call for help. Others say it was a warning, a final breath before the storm closed around him. But there's another theory, one whispered by those who understand the Force in ways that defy language. They believe it wasn't meant to be found at all. That the signal wasn't for us, it was for the Force itself. A last imprint, a final mark, one more ripple in the infinite tide. Because when beings like Starkiller disappear, they don't simply die. Their presence lingers. The Force remembers them. And the galaxy bends ever so slightly around the spaces they once filled. In the months that followed, strange reports began to surface. Unconfirmed sightings. Tales of a lone figure walking across frozen wastelands. A dark shape watching from the cliffs of Lothal. A presence in the mist on Endor's forest moon. Always silent, always gone before anyone could speak. Military patrols were dispatched, but they found nothing. The stories were dismissed as nerves, as hallucinations, as myth. But those who felt the disturbance in the force knew better. Something had changed, as if a wound had been opened in time and no one knew how to close it. Some say that Vader killed him, that the final duel on Camino ended with Starkiller broken at his feet, and the body was destroyed to erase the evidence. Others believe the opposite, that he defeated Vader and vanished to protect the secret, that he was never meant to survive, that survival was his final mistake. But the truth is this: Starkiller didn't vanish in battle. He vanished in silence, not with screams, not with fire, but with stillness, like a light being dimmed, not extinguished, like a life stepping out of time itself. And that's what makes him terrifying, because we don't know where he went. We don't know who he became. All we know is that his last message wasn't for us. It was for someone, or something, far beyond our reach. Maybe it was a call to Juno. Maybe it was a promise to himself. Or maybe, after all the wars and losses and lies, it was his way of saying goodbye to the galaxy that made him, broke him, and then forgot him. But if you stand alone, deep in space, and listen carefully, some say you can still hear it. That broken signal, that whisper of code in the dark. The final breath of a man who was never meant to exist, and who refuses to be erased. Long after the signal vanished, the Force did not. It stirred quietly, subtly among those attuned to it. Not as a voice, not even a vision, just a presence, a feeling, barely there, like the memory of someone you loved and lost, but still feel when you close your eyes. At first, it was dismissed. Jedi survivors, scattered and hunted, had little time for ghost stories. But slowly, a pattern began to form. Isolated reports from across the galaxy told of moments where the Force shifted, like it was responding to something unseen. A cold in the air, a tightening of breath, the kind of stillness that made even the most experienced masters pause mid-meditation. On Ossus, a young Force-sensitive initiate claimed he saw a man cloaked in shadow walking among the ancient ruins. When the teachers rushed to the site, there were no footprints, no disturbances, only a lingering sense of sorrow and confusion, like something had been watching and waiting. On Dantooine, a Jedi Knight swore she heard a voice whisper her name in the middle of the night, a voice that wasn't her own. When she followed it into the grasslands, she found nothing but silence and a burned circle of ground, as if lightning had struck from nowhere. Some say these stories were just echoes of trauma. The galaxy had suffered too much, too fast. The mind invents ghosts to survive grief. But those who knew Starkiller, truly knew him, felt something else. They didn't see a phantom. They felt his presence like gravity. Heavy, inescapable, familiar. The Force does not forget those who bend it. Starkiller had torn starships from the sky. He had survived what no other clone could. He had been shaped by both Sith and Jedi, and had rejected them both. That kind of life leaves scars, not just on the body, but on the Force itself. A few old prophets, exiles from the dark side, began to whisper among themselves. They said a fracture had opened, not a wound in the galaxy, but in the weave of fate. As if someone who was meant to die had lived, and now the future was rewriting itself to account for that mistake. They feared it, because in Sith prophecy, there is a shadow known as the Unnamed One, a being born of conflict, sustained by loss, and denied a place in the grand design. A creature who slips through fate not to fulfill prophecy, but to ruin it, not a destroyer of worlds, a destroyer of certainty. To some, Starkiller had become that. He wasn't chosen by the Force. He wasn't trained by tradition. He was grown in a tank, broken, rebuilt, and let loose. A weapon without a war. A storm without a direction. And when such a thing disappears, the galaxy doesn't breathe easier. It waits. Because it knows storms don't vanish. They return. One Jedi archivist found something strange buried in an old holocron, half corrupted, nearly unreadable. But within it, a phrase repeated in broken basic. The clone walks backward through the future. It didn't mean anything at first. But over time, more records like it began to surface. Mysterious references to someone who should not be. Someone whose survival was causing the timelines to ripple like a stone dropped into still water. It wasn't just the Jedi who noticed. A former Inquisitor, long thought dead, emerged from hiding with a warning. He claimed to have seen Starkiller in a Force dream, kneeling alone in a storm of falling stars. Around him, memories bled into the present. Vader, Juno, Kota. Each one fading like smoke, and at the center, the clone himself, unmoving, as if waiting for time to make a decision. What frightened the Inquisitor wasn't the image, it was the silence. In that dream, Starkiller didn't speak. He didn't fight, he didn't scream. He simply watched, as if he knew that his fate had already happened, and he was only living its echo. Those who believe in the living Force say this is impossible, that every soul follows its path, dies, and becomes part of the greater whole. But there are others, those who study the cosmic force, who believe that some beings leave behind more than memory. They leave behind friction, like a song that can't stop playing, like a question that refuses to be answered. In that sense, Starkiller never left. His body may have vanished, his voice may be silent, but the Force still stirs where he once walked. Not in celebration, not in mourning, but in uncertainty. The kind of unease that suggests the story isn't over, not yet. And in the farthest corners of space, where hyperspace lanes grow thin and the stars hang farther apart, some explorers say they've seen things, brief flashes of a man with two lightsabers, standing alone in the void, his face hidden beneath a hood, never attacking, never moving, just watching, like a memory or a warning. Whatever he became, it wasn't peace. The Force does not whisper peace when it remembers Starkiller. It whispers questions. It whispers loss. It whispers a name that was never meant to be spoken. He should have died that day. The lightning, the fall, the pain, it was all real. The scars left behind by Vader's betrayal, by the Force storm that lit the sky over Camino, should have ended him. And yet, the clone that should have crumbled into silence did something no one expected. He kept breathing. They say some survivors aren't born, they're built. And in that moment, Starkiller, or what was left of him, wasn't a Sith, or a Jedi, or even a man. He was only one thing, unfinished. He wandered through the wreckage of a broken city, dragging his ruined body through the storm-slick metal of Tipoca's empty corridors. Every step forward was a memory. Every breath was pain. The facility was dying, falling into the ocean below. But something kept him from letting go. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the last image of her face, Juno, or maybe it was the part of him that didn't want to give Vader the satisfaction. But Starkiller chose not to die. And that was something new. The cloning tanks had been shattered. Most of the other experiments had already drowned. The only sounds left were the whine of sparking wires, and the wind that screamed like a grieving ghost through the structure's cracks. But beneath the ruined decks, there was one chamber that hadn't collapsed. One final cloning cylinder, intact, functional, and still glowing. He didn't remember how he got there. He only knew that it called to him, not with the Force, but with something deeper, something raw, like instinct. When he stared into the green-lit fluid, he saw a face, not his, not quite, another version, another failure. But its eyes were open, watching him, as if waiting for him to choose. And for the first time, he didn't destroy the clone. He didn't lash out, didn't rage, didn't scream. He just stood there, staring. This one hadn't been activated. It hadn't been twisted into a weapon or broken by visions. It was empty, pure. He reached out and shut it down, not in anger, but in peace. He let it rest, let it fade. And then he walked away. Nobody knows where he went after that. There are no records, no transmissions. Only a faint echo in the Force, like a breath held in a cave. There and not there. Present, but unreachable. Some say he stowed away on one of the last escape shuttles launched by the rebels. Others believe he leapt into the ocean and let the tide carry him into the abyss. But the truth is more complicated. Because the truth is, he didn't just disappear from the galaxy. He disappeared from himself. Every time someone tried to track his presence, Force sensitives, bounty hunters, even Imperial probes, they found nothing. Not silence, not static, just absence. Like he had unhooked his soul from time and let it drift into the margins. The Jedi called it Force cloaking. But this was more than hiding. It was forgetting. And in that forgetting, something strange happened. Starkiller stopped being a weapon. He stopped being a ghost. He stopped being anything that could be found, used, or hunted. He became possibility. Some Force visions speak of him appearing years later, cloaked in rags, walking the sands of Jakku. Others whisper of a lone warrior on the moons of Iago, where the stars fall like tears and voices cry from the cliffs. But in all these stories, he never speaks, never fights. He only watches, waiting, as if he's trying to remember who he used to be. There's one account never confirmed of a rebel pilot who crash-landed on an uncharted moon near the unknown regions. Her ship was failing. Life support was gone. She should have died, but she didn't. She said someone found her, dragged her from the wreck, wrapped her in a cloak, gave her water. And when she asked his name, he only whispered, "I don't know anymore." She described his face, scarred, tired, but familiar, and when she tried to touch him, he was already gone. Some historians dismissed it, others obsessed over it. But Juno Eclipse, she believed it. She never stopped believing. She searched for years, not with maps, not with fleets, but with hope, because deep down she felt it too, the echo. The tremble in the Force when he crossed her mind, the cold air in the room that followed his name, the way shadows bent when she whispered, "Galen." He wasn't dead. He was unfinished. The Kamino clone had done the one thing none of the others could. He refused to become what they wanted. He refused to forget love. He refused to die. And in doing so, he became something Vader could never control. A secret, a survivor, a possibility that still haunts the edges of the galaxy. Because in a war of destiny, he made a choice. He chose to disappear. The war ended, or so they said. The Empire fractured, the rebellion rose, names changed, flags fell. But in the quiet corners of the galaxy, in the parts without parades or politics, people still whispered about the man who disappeared. Starkiller, or whatever was left of him. There were no monuments, no graves, no confirmed records. Just shadows. The kind that moved when no light should be there. The kind that followed no one. And the kind that never stopped watching. Even after peace returned, there were reports, odd sightings, lost patrols, Jedi hopefuls who vanished in places where the Force pulsed too strongly. Each account different, each one unbelievable, but always familiar. It wasn't just the strength of the intrusions, it was the emotion behind them. Grief, longing, regret. Like the Force itself had a scar that hadn't healed. Some scholars speculated that he had become one with the Force, not through death, but by refusing life. That he'd dissolved into something between being and memory. A ripple, a fracture, a bruise on the timeline of the Force. Others believed the truth was simpler, that he lived, alone, quiet, choosing exile not because he was hunted, but because he could no longer trust himself. Because what do you do when your own mind isn't yours? When your memories might not be real? When your instincts were bred for war, and your heart was stitched from lies? You vanish, not to escape others, but to escape becoming them. There is a legend from Ossus told only to those who train in the ancient ways. It speaks of a warrior with no code, no allegiance, and no past. He wanders ruined temples and silent catacombs, not as a thief or a pilgrim, but as a mourner. He lights no saber, he speaks no name, but when danger comes, he protects without hesitation. And when he leaves, the ruins always seem quieter. Like some old rage had finally been put to sleep. The locals call him the Empty One, not because he lacks power, but because he gave it back. And perhaps that was the real vanishing point. Not the day Kamino fell, not the battle above its ocean, not even the moment Vader was spared. The true disappearance happened when Starkiller, the clone, the shadow, the weapon laid down his own purpose. Not because he was finished, but because he wanted to begin. There's a quiet kind of heroism in that. Most warriors fight until they die. Most survivors keep looking back. But he did something else. He disappeared forward, into an unknown future, into a life with no prophecy, no master, no title. Only the long, difficult walk back to being a person again. And in that walk, something strange happened. The Force no longer screamed when it touched him. It whispered. Soft, subtle, gentle. He began to feel it not as a weapon, but as a companion, a guide, a promise that he could be more than what he was built for. That maybe, just maybe, he could live a life not written in blood. One vision recorded by a Miraluka seer in the Outer Rim tells of a figure standing at the edge of a starlit cliff. He carries no weapon, wears no armor. His hands are open, empty, but his presence bends the air around him. She said he was looking at the stars like someone who had never seen them before, like someone free. It's possible the galaxy will never know his true fate. Perhaps that's how it should be, because if the Force is balance, and if balance is choice, then Starkiller, the clone born in chains, chose something most never do. He chose peace, not the peace of surrender, or retreat, or hiding, but the peace of understanding. The peace that comes when a blade is laid down, not because the war is over, but because the heart no longer needs it. In the end, he didn't need to be remembered. He only needed to stop fighting, to feel the wind again, to breathe without a command in his ear, to sleep without seeing Camino fall again and again. Some say he still walks among the stars, that if you listen closely in the places where the Force hums softly, old forests, empty ruins, silent shores, you might feel him pass. Not a ghost, not a hero, just a man, finally alone with himself. That was the last vanishing, not of body, but of burden. And maybe that's all he ever wanted. To stop being a clone and start being someone else. Someone real, someone free. No one could agree on what Starkiller became. Some said he died the day Camino fell into the sea, his body lost with the clones who never had names. Others swore he survived, wandering the galaxy like a scar the Force refused to heal. But no record, no archive, no imperial report could ever say for certain. And that uncertainty became his legacy. Years passed, wars shifted. The Empire tightened its grip, then began to crack. And through it all, Starkiller's name surfaced only in fragments half remembered, half denied. Not as a hero, not as a villain, but as something unfinished. Among former Imperials, his name was spoken with unease. Officers who once served under Vader recalled a presence that frightened even the Sith. Not because of power alone, but because of defiance. Starkiller had not simply turned against his master. He had walked away. And that act disturbed those who believed obedience was absolute. In hidden cantinas on Corellia and Nar Shaddaa, smugglers traded rumors. A man with 2 lightsabers seen standing alone on a landing pad. A figure who boarded no ships, spoke to no one, and vanished before dawn. Always the same description. Always the same feeling of cold silence left behind. Most dismissed it as myth, but the Force-sensitive did not. Jedi, in hiding those few who survived Order 66, felt something different when they heard his name. Not hope, not fear, but weight. As if Starkiller's existence had bent the Force in a way that never corrected itself. As if the galaxy was still adjusting to a mistake that refused to vanish. One old Jedi master, living in exile on a moon with no name, recorded a single line in his journal before disappearing himself. Some wounds do not close. They walk. No explanation followed. The rebellion never claimed Starkiller. Official histories credited Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, and countless unnamed soldiers. But those closest to the truth knew the first spark had not come from a Senate chamber. It came from a man raised to destroy hope who chose not to. That knowledge was dangerous. So, it was buried. Even Juno Eclipse vanished from the records. Her imperial file was sealed. Her rebel clearance quietly revoked. She became another absence in a galaxy full of them. But some nights, in quiet systems, far from hyperspace lanes, Alliance sensors detected small ships drifting with no destination set. Ships that never docked. Ships that changed course without explanation. She was still searching, not for answers. For him, the Sith treated Starkiller differently. Palpatine never spoke his name again. Vader destroyed every remaining clone chamber personally, not out of strategy, out of anger. The apprentice who escaped him had done something no Jedi ever had. He had survived without purpose. That was unforgivable, because Sith believed purpose was everything. Over time, Starkiller's story changed. In some versions, he became a warning told to Inquisitors, a lesson about failure. In others, he became a symbol among Force cultists, proof that destiny could be broken. That creation did not guarantee control, but the truth sat quietly beneath all of it. Starkiller never sought to be remembered. He never carved his name into history. He simply left. And that absence echoed louder than any victory. Because the galaxy is built on legends, on chosen ones, on heroes who burn bright and die loudly. Starkiller did neither. He slipped through the cracks, refused the story written for him. And by doing so, he became something history could not categorize. Not Sith, Not Jedi, not martyr, not savior, just a man who walked away from the war inside himself. And in a galaxy addicted to conflict, that was the strangest legacy of all. Somewhere in the wreckage of the Empire, a whisper took root. Not of a weapon, not of a strategy, but of a person, a name. One almost no one could prove, yet too many had heard to dismiss: Starkiller. It moved like a rumor, refusing to die, passed between those who'd lost everything and still kept fighting. The rebellion didn't need gods, it needed fuel. Stories that made frightened soldiers stand up again. Legends that could not be verified but also could not be disproven. Starkiller became one of those. He wasn't in the holovids. No statues bore his image. But when exhausted squads landed on broken moons or hid in asteroid fields, someone always knew the story. The secret apprentice who turned on Vader. The clone who chose to protect instead of destroy. The shadow who fought for love, not orders. Sometimes they said he'd founded the rebellion. Other times that he'd died saving its first spark. No one knew which was true, but truth didn't matter anymore. The idea of Starkiller was worth more than the man himself. Cassian Andor heard it once on a transport from Wobani. The whisper came from a dying Bothan who claimed to have seen Starkiller tear a Star Destroyer from the sky with his bare hands. Cassian didn't believe him, but he remembered the tone of his voice, not excited, not delusional, just tired, like someone trying to pass on a burden. Leia Organa read a sealed report once, deep in Rebel intelligence files. It mentioned an unnamed agent who nearly assassinated Vader long before Scarif. No images, no fingerprints, just a timestamp and a line redacted by Mon Mothma herself. She never asked about it again. Because in war, some truths are more dangerous than lies. On Lothal, Ezra Bridger found a Jedi holocron buried beneath the wreckage of a crashed freighter. It didn't contain lessons. It didn't hold blueprints. It simply played a recording. Distorted, grainy, barely audible. But the voice was clear. This is Galen Marek. If you're hearing this, then I died for nothing. The holocron self-destructed after one play. Ezra never told the others. In the Ghost crew, stories were shared in fragments. Kanan said he felt something once on a moon near Camino. Something that felt like a Jedi, but not pure, not dark, just broken. Hera dismissed it as one more Force anomaly. But Zeb remembered that Kanan didn't sleep for 2 nights after. In rogue cells across the galaxy, Starkiller's name became code, a signal. It meant mission failed, but we're still alive. It meant they didn't break us. Commanders used it when encryption failed. Pilots painted it in symbols no one else understood. Even Saw Gerrera used it once to identify a contact on Dantooine who never showed up. The meeting spot remained empty for 3 days. But every night, the same ship passed overhead. Slow, silent, watching. He was never seen. In time, some began to doubt he had ever existed at all. That was the point. Starkiller's legacy wasn't meant to be tracked. It wasn't built for parades or commemoration. It existed in moments. Quiet decisions. A rebel gunner who refused to fire on a fleeing Star Destroyer. A young recruit who spared a clone trooper, even after learning what they'd done. A Jedi who walked away from battle rather than kill again. They didn't do it because of Starkiller. They did it because something inside them felt haunted, as if someone was watching, not judging, just hoping they'd choose better than he did. The rebellion fought with facts, strategies, troop counts. But beneath all of that was belief. And belief needed shadows. It needed figures who didn't fit into medals or ranks. It needed reminders that the Force didn't only belong to temples and masters. Sometimes it belonged to mistakes. And that's what Starkiller had been. A mistake that survived. He never led fleets, never claimed titles. But in the unspoken parts of the rebellion, in the silences between orders, in the moments before battle, his memory lived. Not as inspiration, as warning. Because the war wasn't just about defeating the Empire. It was about not becoming it. And no one embodied that lesson more than the clone who refused to be a weapon. He was gone, but not erased. Across ancient shrines on forgotten worlds, his name was never spoken, yet his presence was there. A shadow that lingered in stone, in song, in the dust of places where the Jedi once prayed and the Sith once bled. Starkiller had vanished, but something remained. Something that lived in the cracks between history and myth. The galaxy moved on without him. Wars began, empires rose, and the Force bent around new conflicts, new destinies. But hidden in the currents of the unifying force, echoes of the clone's agony remained. Not as visions, not as memories, but as warnings felt by the most sensitive minds. Jedi seers, who could no longer meditate without crying. Night sisters who heard a voice in their bones when the stars aligned just right. Hermits in the outer rim, who claimed a storm was coming, born of a scream from the past. And then there were the rituals. They weren't written in holocrons. They weren't taught. They were felt instinctive acts performed by those who didn't know why they did them. On Dantooine, a child drew a circle of ash around a broken lightsaber and wept without reason. On Malachor, a Sith acolyte sat in silence for hours, staring at a wall where no mark could be seen until she collapsed, whispering a name she never knew. These weren't coincidences. They were remnants. Spiritual fingerprints left behind by a being who defied both Jedi and Sith, who bled through the Force in ways neither side could understand. Starkiller had torn a wound into the galaxy, and time could not close it. Some believed he became one with the Force. Others believed he resisted it, anchoring his essence through raw emotion, through the memory of love. Through her, Juno eclipse. She never stopped searching. Long after the rebellion turned to war, after Hoth and Endor and the fires of Jakku, she wandered, not as a soldier, not even as a pilot, as a believer. Every planet she landed on, she asked the same question, not aloud, but through the Force, through the ache in her chest. Are you here? Did you come back? There were moments she swore he answered. A cold breath in a sealed hangar. A familiar hum in the presence of an unfamiliar droid. A dream where she stood beneath a red sun and felt arms around her strong, trembling, holding her like it was the last time. The Jedi wouldn't speak of him. The Sith denied he ever existed. But in the dead zones of the galaxy, where the Force still moved wild and ancient, people remembered in their own way. They left offerings at the foot of fallen statues. They carved symbols that looked like his saber hilts into cave walls. They whispered stories to their children about a man who chose love over legacy and disappeared because of it. And then there were the archives, buried, redacted, locked behind security clearances older than the Empire itself. In a vault beneath Coruscant's ruins, a nameless slicer discovered a fragment of audio distorted, degraded, nearly lost. But the voice was clear. I remember her. That was all. 3 words. Spoken by a clone no one believed was real. Archived by a system that tried to erase him. And still, it survived. Rumors spread through the underground, not just of Starkiller, but of a new movement, one that rejected the Jedi code. the Sith dogma, and the military obedience of the New Republic. 4 sensitives who followed no order, who trained in silence, who meditated in darkness, not out of fear, but out of grief, as if honoring something broken, as if remembering someone who never found peace. They called themselves the Forgotten Path, and though they claimed no founder, their philosophy echoed everything Starkiller lived and died for. Emotional strength, free will, compassion without weakness, power without corruption. The Council dismissed them as radicals, the Sith called them cowards, but those who met them face to face felt something different. Not danger, not anger, but mourning like a candle burning in the ruins of a temple. Faint, persistent, sacred. No one knew if Starkiller ever saw them, if he watched from beyond the veil, or from the shadows of the galaxy, or from nowhere at all. But his silence spoke louder than their teachings. It shaped them, it haunted them, and as time drifted forward, so did the rituals. A girl on Jeddah stood alone at twilight and recited words she didn't understand. A Force ghost in exile lowered his head when he felt her. And somewhere, buried in the static of a distant transmission no one could trace, a voice whispered, "I remember," not as a promise, as a choice. They never found his body. That was the first thing the rebellion admitted when their records were finally opened. After Camino, after the storm, after the lightning had ended and the ocean had returned to its quiet, violent rhythm, there was nothing. No remains, no confirmed death, no proof. Only the burned wreckage of a cloning facility, scattered with fragments of armor and dreams. And in that silence, the memory of Starkiller began to grow. He was no longer a man. He became a ghost that lived in whispered stories, a warning passed between rebel outposts, a mystery the Empire pretended not to fear. For some, he was a symbol of hope, for others, a phantom of unfinished vengeance. But, to the few who had known him, truly known him, he was still just one thing. A broken boy who never stopped searching for something real. Bail Organa spoke of him once, years later. He said Starkiller reminded him of Anakin. That same fire, that same storm beneath the surface. But unlike Anakin, Starkiller had never chosen darkness freely. It had been handed to him, programmed into him. And somehow, despite it all, he fought against it. Leia never met him, but she read Juno's journals. In them, the pilot had written about a man who wasn't sure he was a man at all. A man who had dreams that didn't belong to him. Visions of forests he'd never walked. Stars he'd never seen. Hands he'd never held. The memories of a life stolen before it had even started. Some Jedi survivors claimed they sensed him, even after Kamino, that his presence flickered at the edge of hyperspace, like a candle resisting the dark. A Jedi Knight stationed on Ossus once wrote in her logs that she awoke from meditation sobbing, having seen a face she couldn't name but couldn't forget. "He's not gone," she wrote. "He's waiting." And then there were the holocrons, the ones recovered from wrecked starships and burned temples. Some contained corrupted data images of duels, recordings of screams, visions of a figure wrapped in shadows, fighting as if trying to tear the Force apart. But in one, buried in a vault beneath the ruins of Kato Nymoidia, a small voice could be heard. A young voice, calm, quiet. "I don't know who I am, but I know I don't want to be him." The voice never said a name, but everyone who heard it knew. Time passed, as it always does. Empires rose and fell. Planets changed names. Wars were won and lost. But the story of the clone who defied his programming, who chose pain over obedience, love over fear remained. Passed down not through textbooks, but through quiet conversations in darkened halls, around fires, beneath stars. In one corner of the galaxy, the Night Sisters of Dathomir began to speak of him not as Jedi or Sith, but as something else. A Shade Walker, they called him. One who passed through life and death without belonging to either. A Force wound. A spirit with unfinished purpose. The Sith never honored him, but they studied him. Vader's records, long hidden, showed experiments beyond ethics, clones that failed, memories overwritten. But Starkiller survived them all. Not because he was stronger, but because he remembered, because some part of him refused to let go of the light. That was what made him dangerous. And in the Jedi archives, rebuilt stone by stone on Yavin 4, a single data card rests inside a sealed drawer. It contains no image, no coordinates. Just a line spoken by Ram Kota during a covert mission years before his death. He wasn't supposed to exist, but neither was hope. There are people who still search for him. Pilots who fly to the edges of uncharted space. Force sensitives who meditate on his name. Smugglers who swear they saw a man with his eyes on a forgotten moon. No one agrees. No one can prove it. But some things don't need proof. Because what Starkiller left behind wasn't a legacy of power, or conquest, or victory. It was the memory of someone who was never given a choice, yet still made one. Who stood before the greatest darkness the galaxy had ever known and said no. Not with speeches, not with prophecy, but with silence. A silence that still echoes, even now. A silence that outlived him,